Welcome. Tonight, you will fall asleep to the oldest stories Europe ever told. The Greek myths, stories of gods and mortals, of heroes and monsters, of pride and punishment, of love and loss, of the strange, tangled relationships between the human and the divine. These stories were told around fires in ancient villages 3,000 years ago and longer. They were sung by poets in royal courts. They were carved on the sides of temples. They were painted on pottery and woven into fabric. They were eventually written down by Homer and Hesiod, by Apollodorus and Ovid, by countless other voices, so that we could read them today. You will hear 10 of these stories tonight, slowly, with pauses, with time for your mind to wander, with time to fall asleep, if sleep is near. You do not need to follow every detail. You do not need to remember the names. The stories will sit in you. They will surface in dreams. They will become part of how you understand yourself in small and quiet ways, even if you cannot trace the connection back to tonight. The Greeks believed that their stories were not just entertainment. They believed that the myths held truths about human nature, about what happens when we reach beyond our station, about what happens when we love too deeply, about what happens when we are cruel or proud or foolish or brave. The myths are mirrors. We see ourselves in them. So tonight, you will hear the story of Pandora, the first woman, and the box of sorrows. The story of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. The story of Persephone, the maiden of spring who became the queen of the dead. The story of Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun. The story of Orpheus, who went to the underworld for love. The story of Theseus and the Minotaur. The story of Perseus and the snake-haired Medusa. The story of Heracles and his 12 labors. The story of the Trojan War and the long journey home of Odysseus. 10 stories. 3 hours. One long night. You are welcome here. Settle in. Breathe slowly. Let your eyes close if they want to. The stories begin. In the beginning, the world was made by the elder gods. The Titans. They were the children of earth and sky, and they were vast and powerful, and they ruled the cosmos in the old way, before the gods we now remember took the heavens. Among the Titans was Prometheus. His name means foresight. He could see the future. And Prometheus had a brother named Epimetheus. His name means hindsight. He could see only the past. The brothers were very different. Prometheus was wise. Epimetheus was foolish. But they were brothers, and they loved each other. And together they were given a task by Zeus, the king of the new gods, after the Titans had been defeated. The task was to make the mortal creatures of the earth, to shape the animals, to distribute among them the gifts that would let each species survive. Epimetheus, eager to begin, asked his brother if he could do the work, and Prometheus, kind to his foolish brother, agreed. Epimetheus began to make the animals. He gave each one a gift. To the lion, strength. To the deer, swiftness. To the bear, claws. To the bird, wings. To the fish, fins. To some he gave thick fur to keep them warm. To others, sharp teeth to defend themselves. To others, the ability to hide in burrows or in trees. But Epimetheus was foolish, and as he worked, he forgot to keep track of what he had given out. By the time he was finished with the animals, he had used up all the gifts. And then he remembered. The most important creation was still to come. The humans. Epimetheus had nothing left for them. He went to his brother in tears. Prometheus looked at the humans Epimetheus had made. They were naked. They had no claws. They had no thick fur. They had no wings. They were weak compared to the other animals. Without gifts, they would not survive. They would die out in a single generation. Prometheus thought for a long time, and then he made a decision that would change the course of the world. He went up to Olympus the home of the gods. He went to the hearth fire, which burned eternally in the sacred precinct of the gods. He took a fennel stalk, hollow inside, and he hid a coal of the sacred fire within it. And he came back down to earth. He gave the fire to the humans, and he taught them to use it. With fire, the humans could keep warm in winter. They could cook food. They could see in the dark. They could harden tools. They could clear land for farming. They could melt metal and forge weapons. Fire was the foundation of everything that would come. When Zeus discovered what Prometheus had done, he was furious. Fire was meant for the gods. By giving it to humans, Prometheus had elevated mortals to a station closer to the divine than was proper. The natural order had been disrupted. Zeus would have his revenge. But Zeus's revenge against Prometheus would come later, and it would be terrible. First, he had to punish the humans. Zeus called the gods together. He told Hephaestus, the craftsman god, to make a woman of clay. Hephaestus did. He shaped her with great skill, more beautiful than any creature that had walked the earth before. The other gods gave her gifts. Athena gave her cleverness and the skill of weaving. Aphrodite gave her grace and the power to enchant men's hearts. Hermes gave her a quick tongue and a curious mind. Apollo gave her the gift of music. When she was finished, the gods named her Pandora. The name means all gifted. Each god had given her something. But Zeus also gave her a gift. He gave her a box, or in some versions of the story, a seal jar. He told her that she must never open it. He did not say what was inside. She was simply to keep it closed and never look within. Then Zeus sent Pandora down to earth. He sent her to Epimetheus, the foolish brother of Prometheus. Prometheus had warned Epimetheus to accept no gifts from Zeus. But Epimetheus, looking at the beautiful Pandora, forgot the warning instantly. He welcomed her. He married her. He gave her every honor in his house. Pandora lived with Epimetheus happily at first, but the box that Zeus had given her sat on a shelf in a corner of their home, never opened. And Pandora was curious. Hermes had given her a curious mind. After all, she wondered, what could be inside? Why was she forbidden to look? The wondering grew. Day by day, she would walk past the box, and her gaze would linger on it. She would think about it as she fell asleep at night. She would dream about it. One day, when Epimetheus was away, the curiosity became too strong. Pandora went to the box. She lifted the lid. Just a little. Just a peek. The lid flew open. Out poured every evil that would ever afflict humanity. Disease, old age, sorrow, cruelty, hatred, envy, greed, fear, They flew out into the world, dispersing in every direction, finding the people of the earth, attaching themselves to their lives. The world that had been clean and innocent was now infected forever with every evil that would ever exist. Pandora, in horror, tried to close the box. She slammed it shut, but everything had already escaped. Almost everything. She heard a small voice from within the box. A soft voice calling to her, pleading to be let out. She hesitated. She had just released every evil onto the world. Could she trust whatever else was in the box? But the voice was sweet, and Pandora was kind, even in her foolishness. She lifted the lid again, just a little, and the last creature inside flew out. It was hope. The story is told in different ways. In some versions, hope was a curse, a torment to humanity, who would always hope for things that would not come. In other versions, hope was the great gift, the one good thing the gods had left in the box, the consolation for all the suffering that had been released. The Greeks believed both. Hope is what makes the suffering bearable. Hope is also what keeps us suffering longer than we should, when we should let go. This is the first story, the story of how the world became as it is. Imperfect, filled with evils, yet not without hope. When you sleep tonight, you sleep in the world that began that day. The world Pandora let out. The world hope still lingers in. The story continues. We have heard how Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. We have heard about Pandora and her box. But we have not yet heard what happened to Prometheus himself for the crime of giving humans the divine flame. Zeus's anger toward Prometheus was bottomless. Pandora and her box have been a punishment for humanity. Now came the punishment for Prometheus. Zeus ordered that Prometheus be taken to the very edge of the world, to the Caucasus Mountains, on the far eastern boundary of the known earth. There, on a cliff face high above a wild sea, Prometheus was chained. The chains were forged by Hephaestus himself, made of unbreakable bronze. They were driven into the rock with iron spikes. Prometheus's arms were stretched out, his legs pinned, his back pressed against the cold stone of the cliff. He could not move. He could not sleep. He could not turn away from the sun. He could not shelter from the rain. He could not lower his arms. And then Zeus sent an eagle. Each day, the eagle would come, and it would tear open Prometheus's side, and it would feast on his liver. Because Prometheus was a titan, an immortal, the liver would grow back overnight. Every morning, the wound would heal. And every day, the eagle would return. And every day, the agony would begin again. This was the punishment. Not a single death, not a clean end, but an eternal repetition of pain. For Prometheus, it was the price of foresight. He had known what was coming. He had given humans fire knowing what would happen to him. He chose the pain anyway, because he loved humanity, because he believed that what he gave them was worth what it cost him. For centuries, Prometheus hung on the cliff. Birds flew past. Storms came and went. The seasons rotated below him. The world continued. Humans, with their new fire, built villages, then towns, then cities. They forged weapons. They lit lamps. They cooked food. They built temples. The gift of fire became the foundation of human civilization. None of them knew of the suffering on the distant cliff. And then, after a very long time, Prometheus was freed. The hero Heracles, on one of his great journeys, came to the Caucasus. He saw the chain titan. He drew his bow. He shot the eagle as it descended for its daily meal. The eagle fell, dead, into the sea below. Heracles then broke the chains with his great strength. Prometheus was free. But Prometheus had something else to give. He had foresight, after all. He told Heracles that the journey ahead of the hero would be difficult, but that he would succeed if he was patient and wise. He told Heracles the secret of obtaining the golden apples of the Hesperides, one of the labors that Heracles had been struggling with. And Prometheus, in his last act before being released to the wider world, brought to Zeus a piece of knowledge that the king of the gods had been hungry for. The secret of a certain marriage that Zeus had been considering between himself and the sea nymph Thetis. Prometheus warned Zeus that the marriage would produce a son who would be greater than his father and would overthrow him. Zeus, hearing this, abandoned his pursuit of Thetis. He arranged for her to marry a mortal instead. The mortal she married was Peleus. Their son would be the great warrior Achilles. So Prometheus, even in his suffering, even at the end, served humanity and the gods both. He had given humans fire, and he had given Zeus a warning that saved Zeus's throne. He was, in the end, the wisest of the Titans, perhaps the wisest of all the beings who walked or flew in the divine realms. The Greeks honored him. They saw him as a symbol of the human capacity for sacrifice, for foresight, for compassion. The Romantic poets, 2,000 years later, would write whole poems about Prometheus. They would see him as the archetype of the rebel against unjust authority. They would see him as a brother of every human being who has ever struggled to lift their fellows out of darkness. Sleep gently. The fire is still here. It is in every lamp, in every furnace, in every kitchen stove, in every spark of insight that lights up the human mind. Each of these is a small descendant of the original flame that Prometheus carried down in his fennel stalk. We carry his gift still. The story continues. In the early days of the world, before the seasons existed as we know them, the earth was always in bloom. Spring was eternal. The fields were always green. The trees were always heavy with fruit. The rain came when it was needed. The sun shone when it was needed. The world was the garden of Demeter, the goddess of grain and harvest, who tended it with love. Demeter had a daughter. Her name was Persephone. She was young and beautiful, and she was her mother's joy. The two of them walked together through the meadows and fields. Demeter taught her daughter the names of every flower: the lily, the narcissus, the poppy, the anemone. Persephone learned the songs of the seasons, the cycles of planting and harvesting, the names of the rivers and the spirits that lived in them. But Persephone was not only beloved of her mother. She was beloved of Hades, too, the god of the underworld, the dark brother of Zeus, the lord of the dead. Hades had seen Persephone walking in the meadows. He had watched her from below through the cracks in the earth. He had fallen in love with her. He went to his brother Zeus, the king of the gods. He asked for permission to take Persephone as his wife. Zeus was in a difficult position. He did not want to anger Demeter, whose love for her daughter was famous. But Zeus also owed his brother Hades. Hades ruled a vast and lonely kingdom. Hades had asked for one thing: a queen. Zeus could not refuse outright. So Zeus gave a conditional answer. He said, in effect, that he would not stop Hades, but he would not openly help him either. Hades would have to take Persephone in such a way that Demeter would not know who was responsible. Hades made his plan. He chose a day when Persephone would be wandering the meadow alone, picking flowers. He caused a particularly beautiful narcissus to bloom near her, a flower so radiant that she would have to bend down to pick it. As she did, the ground opened beneath her. From the dark crack, Hades rose in his chariot drawn by black horses. He seized Persephone. He pulled her down into the earth. The ground closed over them. The narcissus lay broken on the grass. When Persephone did not return that evening, Demeter began to search. She walked the earth, calling her daughter's name. She crossed mountains. She crossed deserts. She asked every spirit she met. None of them had seen Persephone. The earth itself seemed to have swallowed her. Demeter searched for 9 days and 9 nights. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She did not bathe. By the end of the 9 days, she had become a thin and haggard wanderer, unrecognizable as the great goddess of harvest. On the 10th day, she met the goddess Hecate, who knew many secrets of the deep places. Hecate told Demeter that someone, she did not know who, had taken Persephone, and that the secret might be known to Helios, the sun, who saw everything. Demeter went to Helios. Helios told her what he had seen. He had seen Hades take Persephone. He had seen her vanish into the earth. The ground had closed. The kingdom of the dead had received a new queen. Demeter went mad with grief. In her sorrow and her rage, she stopped tending the earth. The crops withered. The trees lost their leaves. The flowers died. The rain stopped coming. The sun, when it came, only burned and dried what little remained. The fields turned to dust. The animals starved. The humans starved. The world, which had been an eternal garden, was becoming a desert. The gods watched with growing alarm. If the earth died, there would be no more humans. If there were no more humans, there would be no more sacrifices and offerings to the gods. The whole order of the cosmos depended on humans surviving. Demeter's grief was destroying everything. Zeus sent messenger after messenger to Demeter, begging her to relent, promising her gifts, threatening her with consequences. Demeter would not be moved. She told them all the same thing. Until her daughter was returned, the earth would die. Finally, Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger god, the only god who could travel freely between the worlds, down to Hades. Hermes was to tell Hades that Persephone must be returned to her mother. Hades received the message. He looked at his queen, for she had become his queen by the customs of the underworld. He saw that she was unhappy. He had been kind to her in his way. He had loved her, but she missed her mother. She missed the sun. Hades told Persephone she could go, but before she left, he offered her a small gift, a pomegranate, the fruit of the underworld. He asked her, gently, if she would not eat a few seeds before she went. Persephone took the pomegranate. She broke it open. She ate 6 seeds. She did not know what she had done. In the laws of the underworld, those who ate the food of the dead became bound to the dead. By eating 6 seeds of the pomegranate, Persephone had unknowingly bound herself to spend 6 months of every year in the underworld with Hades. She could spend the other 6 months with her mother, but the cycle would repeat. Every year, forever. When Persephone emerged from the underworld and was reunited with Demeter, the goddess of harvest understood what had happened. She was both joyful and devastated. She would have her daughter back, but only for half the year. So the seasons began. When Persephone is with her mother, the world blooms. The fields are green. The trees bear fruit. The flowers open. This is spring and summer. When Persephone returns to the underworld each autumn, Demeter mourns. The crops wither. The trees lose their leaves. The flowers die. The world becomes cold and barren. This is autumn and winter. Then, in the spring, Persephone returns. The earth bursts into bloom again. The cycle begins anew. This is how the Greeks explain the seasons. As the cycle of a mother's joy and a mother's grief. As the eternal back and forth between life above and death below. As a reminder that nothing in the world stays in one state forever, but moves through cycles that we cannot stop, only accept. When the snow falls outside your window, Persephone is in the underworld. When the cherry trees blossom in the spring, she has returned. The world breathes in and out. We are part of the breathing. Sleep gently. The seasons turn. They will turn again tomorrow. The story continues. This is the story of a boy who flew too close to the sun. It begins with his father, Daedalus. Daedalus was the greatest craftsman of the ancient world. There was no problem he could not solve with cleverness, no machine he could not build. He lived on the island of Crete, where he served King Midas, the powerful ruler of the Aegean Sea. King Midas had a problem. His wife Persephone had borne a strange child, a child with the body of a man and the head of a bull. The child grew. The child became dangerous. The child could not be killed. There were divine reasons that made this impossible, but it could not be allowed to roam free either. It had to be contained. King Midas asked Daedalus for help. Daedalus designed a great prison, a labyrinth, a network of corridors so complex and so confusing that anyone who entered would be unable to find their way out. The Minotaur, for that was the name of the strange child, was placed in the center of the labyrinth. There it lived, fed on human sacrifices that Midas demanded from the conquered cities of the Aegean. Years passed. Daedalus lived well in the court of King Midas. His son Icarus grew up among the workshops. The boy watched his father invent. He learned. He admired his father deeply. But then something went wrong. The story differs in its details, but the outcome is the same. Daedalus, for some reason, political conflict perhaps, or because he had helped someone Midas did not want helped, fell out of favor with the king. Midas imprisoned Daedalus and Icarus in a tower. They could not escape. The island of Crete was surrounded by sea, and Midas controlled every ship that left every harbor. The skies above the island were free, but no human could fly. Daedalus had nothing but his cleverness, so he used it. In his prison cell, he began to gather feathers. He collected them from the windowsill where birds landed. He gathered them from feathers that drifted in through the high window. Over weeks, he accumulated piles of feathers. He also collected wax from candles, from ceilings, from whatever sources he could find within the tower. Slowly, he built 2 pairs of wings. The wings were arranged like the wings of a great bird. The feathers were attached to a frame of wood with wax. The pair of wings was meant to fit on the back of a human, with straps that held them in place. When the wings were finished, Daedalus prepared his son for the escape. He gave Icarus careful instructions. 2 warnings, 2 prohibitions. The first warning: do not fly too low. If you fly too low, the spray from the sea will dampen the feathers. The feathers will become heavy. You will fall. Stay above the spray. The second warning: do not fly too high. If you fly too high, the heat of the sun will melt the wax. The feathers will come loose. You will fall. Stay below the heat. Take the middle path. Fly steady. Follow me. Icarus listened. He nodded. He understood. They strapped on the wings. They climbed to the window of the tower. They jumped. For the first few minutes, they flew. They flew above the courtyards of the palace. They flew above the harbors where the ships of Midas lay at anchor. They flew above the city walls. They flew out over the sea. They were free. Icarus laughed in delight. The wind under his wings, the sun on his face, the earth far below. He had never felt anything like this. He had never imagined that humans could feel this. He turned to his father, who was flying ahead, and he called out his joy. But the joy turned into something else. Pride, ambition, the desire to know more, to fly higher, to see what was up there. Icarus began to rise. He flapped his wings harder. He climbed. His father turned back to look at him. He saw what was happening. He shouted. He warned. He gestured for Icarus to come back down to the middle path. Icarus could not hear him. The wind was loud. He was too excited. He was rising into the bright sky. He could see the sun. He wanted to see it closer. He wanted to feel its full strength. He flew higher. The sun grew hotter. The wax began to soften. The feathers began to loosen. Icarus, in his exhilaration, did not notice. He flapped his wings harder. He climbed faster. The wax melted. The feathers came loose. They scattered into the wind, drifting back and down behind him like a trail of white sparks. Icarus's wings collapsed. He fell. He fell for a long time, past the high air, past the middle path his father was still flying, past the level of the sea spray, into the open water. He hit the sea. He sank. Daedalus, flying ahead, saw none of it directly. He felt that something was wrong. He turned. He scanned the sky. His son was gone. He flew back. He searched. He found, at last, a few feathers floating on the surface of the sea. He understood. Daedalus continued his flight, alone, and eventually landed safely on the coast of Sicily. He lived there for many years. He was honored. He continued to invent. He continued to build. But every day, until the end of his life, he remembered his son, the boy who had flown, the boy who had risen too high, the boy who had not listened. The Greeks told this story for centuries. They saw it as a story about hubris, the human tendency to overreach. The same impulse that makes us great is the impulse that destroys us. Ambition lifts us into the air. Ambition burns our wings. But the story is also about love. Daedalus had given his son the means of escape. Daedalus had warned him. Daedalus had loved him. And his son, in his exuberance, had failed to listen. The lesson is not that we should not fly. The lesson is that we should fly steady, not too low, where the sea will pull us down, not too high, where the sun will burn us up. The middle path is where freedom lives. Sleep gently. Tomorrow, if you fly, fly steady. Listen to those who warn you. They love you. The story continues. This is the story of a man who loved a woman so much that he went to the underworld to bring her back. His name was Orpheus. He was the greatest musician who had ever lived. He had been given the gift of music by Apollo, the god of music himself. When Orpheus played his lyre, all of nature listened. The wild animals would lie down beside him in peace. The trees would lean toward him to hear better. The rivers would slow their flow. Even stones, it was said, would weep at the beauty of his songs. Orpheus fell in love with a nymph named Eurydice. She loved him in return. They were married. Their wedding was held in a clearing in the woods, attended by every spirit of the forest and meadow. It was a happy day. Orpheus played. Eurydice danced. The trees themselves seemed to sing. But on her wedding day, Eurydice was bitten by a snake. The poison entered her blood. Within hours, she was dead. Orpheus was destroyed. He sat by her body. He played his lyre. He sang. His songs were so full of grief that even the wild animals stopped to mourn with him. The trees wept. The rivers stilled. The whole forest fell silent in sympathy. Eventually, Orpheus made a decision. He could not live without Eurydice. He would go to the underworld and bring her back. This was not something mortals were supposed to do. The underworld was the realm of Hades. The dead did not return. The boundary was absolute. But Orpheus, in his grief, did not care about absolute boundaries. He went to the entrance of the underworld, a deep cave in a remote part of Greece. He descended. He passed through dark tunnels. He came to the river Styx, where Charon, the ferryman, took the souls of the dead across to the realm of Hades. Charon refused to take Orpheus. Orpheus was alive. The living did not cross. But Orpheus took out his lyre. He began to play. He played the most beautiful song he had ever played in his life. He sang of Eurydice. He sang of his love for her. He sang of the joy they had shared and the grief he could not survive. Charon listened. The ferryman who had never been moved by anything was moved. Tears rolled down his ancient face. He could not deny what he was hearing. He took Orpheus across. Orpheus continued deeper. He came to the three-headed dog, Cerberus, who guarded the inner gates. Cerberus growled. His three heads bared their teeth. But Orpheus began to play again. The music filled the cavern. Cerberus's growls turned to a low whine. The dog lay down, closed his eyes, slept. Orpheus passed through. He came to the throne of Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the dead. They watched the living man approach with wonder. No mortal had ever come so deep. No mortal had ever survived this far. Orpheus stood before them. He bowed. He took out his lyre. He played for them. He played of love. He played of loss. He played of how the world looked when light still touched it and how it felt to walk in a garden in the morning. He played of his wife's laugh. He played of the tenderness he would never feel again if she remained in this place. The kingdom of the dead is cold. The shades who pass through it are hollow. The gods who rule are stern. But Orpheus's music broke through. The shades stopped their drifting. They turned to listen. The torments that racked the punished. Tantalus reaching for fruit that always retreated. Sisyphus rolling his stone, paused. For a moment, the underworld was silent except for the music. Even Hades wept. Even Persephone wept. When the song ended, Hades spoke. He said that Orpheus could have his wife back. She could return to the world above. But there was a condition. Eurydice would follow Orpheus on the long climb back out of the underworld. Orpheus must walk in front, leading the way. Eurydice would follow behind. But Orpheus must not, under any circumstances, turn around to look at her until they were both back in the world of the living. Not once, not even a glance. If he turned to look at her before they emerged into the sunlight, she would be lost forever. Orpheus agreed instantly. He turned. He began to climb. The path out of the underworld is long. Through dark tunnels, across silent rivers, past sleeping monsters. Orpheus walked it slowly, knowing that Eurydice walked behind him. He could not hear her footsteps. The dead do not make sound. He could not feel her presence. The dead have no warmth. He began to doubt. Was she really there? Had Hades been telling the truth, or playing some cruel trick? Was he walking out of the underworld alone, having been deceived? He kept walking. He told himself to trust. He told himself to wait. But the doubt grew. With every step, it grew. He listened. He could hear nothing behind him. He felt nothing behind him. The silence was unbearable. He was almost at the surface. He could see the light of the world above, faintly, through the last opening. He could see the sun. And then, just before he stepped out into the light, when she would have been only a few feet behind him in the final tunnel, he could not stand it anymore. He turned to look. She was there, just behind him. He saw her face. Her eyes opened wide in shock. She reached for him, and then she was gone. Pulled back. The bargain was broken. Hades's law was absolute. She faded into the darkness, falling back into the underworld. The last thing Orpheus heard was her single word. Farewell. He stood at the threshold of the world. Alone. He tried to go back. He tried to descend into the underworld a second time. But the doorway was closed to him. Charon refused to ferry him. Cerberus growled and would not be lulled. The path was sealed. Orpheus lived for the rest of his life in mourning. He wandered the world, playing his music, never finding peace. Eventually, he was killed, torn apart, in one version of the story, by Maenads, the wild followers of Dionysus, who were angry that he would not join their revels. His body was scattered. His head, still singing, floated down a river to the sea. The lyre, in some versions, was placed in the sky as the constellation Lyra. The story of Orpheus has been told for 3,000 years. It has been used as the basis of operas, of poems, of films. It speaks to something universal, to the human desire to bring back what is lost, to the human inability to trust without proof, to the way our doubts, in the final moments before our deepest hopes might be realized, often destroy what we have been working for. Orpheus loved Eurydice enough to enter the underworld. He almost saved her. He failed because he could not trust the silence at his back. He looked, and in looking, he lost her forever. Sleep gently. There are some things in life we have to trust without seeing. There are some paths we have to walk without knowing for certain that what we love is still behind us. The story continues. We have heard already of the Minotaur, the strange child of King Midas's wife, with the body of a man and the head of a bull. We have heard how Daedalus built the labyrinth to contain him. We have heard how the Minotaur was fed on human sacrifices. This is the story of how those sacrifices ended. The city of Athens, at this point in the story, was under the dominion of King Midas. Years before, Midas's son had been killed in Athens. Midas had blamed the city. He had attacked Athens. He had won. As a condition of peace, he had imposed a tribute. Every 7 years, the city of Athens was to send 14 young Athenians, 7 boys and 7 girls, to Crete. They would be taken into the labyrinth. The Minotaur would devour them. 3 times this had happened by the time of this story. 21 boys and 21 girls had been sent across the sea. None had returned. The city of Athens was racked with grief. The parents who had to give up their children for the 3rd sacrifice were inconsolable. The young prince of Athens was named Theseus. He was the son of the king Aegeus. Theseus was brave and strong, the kind of young man who walked into rooms and made others stand straighter. When the time came for the third sacrifice, and the lots were drawn to choose the 14 who would go, Theseus did something unexpected. He volunteered. He told his father he would go to Crete. He would be one of the 14, but he was going to kill the Minotaur and free Athens from the tribute forever. His father wept. He begged Theseus not to go. He had already lost his son's mother years before. He could not lose Theseus too. Theseus would not be moved. He promised his father one thing. The ship that took the sacrifices to Crete carried a black sail. The ship that brought the 14 back, if Theseus succeeded, would change its sail to white. His father should watch for the sail. If it was white, Theseus had won. If it was black, Theseus had failed. The ship sailed for Crete. Theseus stood at the prow, scanning the horizon. The other 13 Athenians sat below, terrified. They arrived. They were brought before King Midas. The king inspected them. He chose, with cruel pleasure, which of them would be sent into the labyrinth first. But King Midas had a daughter. Her name was Ariadne. She saw Theseus among the captives. She fell in love with him. That night, Ariadne came to Theseus in secret. She told him she would help him. She had a plan. She had been talking to Daedalus. Daedalus had given her a thread, a ball of string. Theseus was to take it into the labyrinth. He was to tie one end to the entrance. He was to unspool it as he went. He could find his way back out by following the thread. She gave him also a sword, a short bronze blade, sharp and sure. Theseus took the thread and the sword. He thanked Ariadne. He promised her, in return, that he would take her with him when he sailed home to Athens. He would marry her. He would make her his queen. The next morning, Theseus was sent into the labyrinth. He went alone. The doors were sealed behind him. He was supposed to wander, lost, until the Minotaur found him. But Theseus had Ariadne's thread. He tied one end to a hook by the entrance. He began to walk. He unspooled the thread as he went. He turned corners. He went down stairways. He passed through chambers carved with strange symbols. He could hear distant sounds, the slow, heavy breathing of something large, the occasional bellow of pain or rage. He went deeper, deeper. The corridors grew narrower. The air grew thicker. He could smell something now, the smell of an animal that had been kept in a closed space for too long, the smell of blood. He came to the center of the labyrinth. The Minotaur was there. It was larger than he had imagined, almost twice the height of a man. Its body was massive, covered in matted hair. Its head was the head of a bull, with great horns that scraped against the ceiling of the chamber. Its eyes were the eyes of a creature that had been imprisoned its whole life and had forgotten that anything else was possible. When it saw Theseus, it charged. The fight was brutal. Theseus dodged the first charge. He stabbed at the Minotaur with his sword. The blade slid off the thick hide. The Minotaur swung its head. The horn cut Theseus's shoulder. Blood ran down his arm. But Theseus was the prince of Athens. He had been trained for battle since boyhood. He was quick. He was cunning. He waited. The Minotaur charged again. Theseus stepped aside at the last moment. As the creature passed, Theseus drove his sword into the side of its neck. He pulled the blade across. The Minotaur stumbled, roared, fell. Theseus pulled the sword free. He turned. He found the thread. He began to follow it back. He walked through the corridors. The thread led him true. After what felt like hours, he reached the entrance. The doors were sealed from the outside, but Ariadne was there with the other captive Athenians ready. She had bribed the guards. The doors swung open. Theseus emerged. The 13 other Athenians embraced him. They were saved. They ran to the harbor. They took their ship. Ariadne came with them, as Theseus had promised. They sailed away from Crete in the night. They stopped at an island called Naxos on the way home to rest and resupply. And here the story takes a dark turn. In some versions, Theseus abandoned Ariadne on Naxos. He sailed away while she was asleep. He left her on the island, alone. The reasons are debated. Some say he had grown tired of her. Some say a god told him she was destined for someone else. Some say Theseus was simply a less honorable man than he had pretended to be. In any case, Ariadne woke alone on Naxos. The ship was gone. She wept. She raged. She prayed to the gods for some kind of justice. The god Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, heard her prayers. He came to her. He fell in love with her. He took her as his wife. So Ariadne's story ended better than Theseus deserved. She became the bride of a god. But Theseus, sailing home, was about to face his own dark moment. He had promised his father that he would change the ship's sail from black to white if he succeeded. He had won. He had killed the Minotaur. He had saved the other Athenians. The mission was a success, but Theseus forgot to change the sail. Perhaps he was distracted by what had happened on Naxos. Perhaps he was simply careless. Whatever the reason, the ship returned to Athens with its black sail still raised. His father, the old King Aegeus, was waiting on a cliff overlooking the sea. He had been watching every day for the ship's return. He had been praying. When he saw the black sail in the distance, he understood, or thought he understood, that his son had died. The old king's heart could not bear it. He threw himself from the cliff into the sea below. The sea is still called today the Aegean Sea. It bears the name of the king who died of grief, on a day his son had actually triumphed. Theseus came ashore to find his father dead. He had been gone only a few weeks. He had won the great battle of his life. He had freed his city, but he had lost his father to a small mistake. He had forgotten to change his sail. He became the king of Athens. He ruled for many years. He was a good king, mostly, though his life had other dark chapters. He never fully recovered from the day his ship came home and his father was already gone. This is the story of how the city of Athens was freed from the tribute. And it is also the story of how small forgettings can cause vast grief. The labyrinth that killed Theseus's father was not the labyrinth of Crete. It was the labyrinth of his own forgetfulness. A single small thing, a sail not changed, destroyed what would otherwise have been a triumphal return. Be careful of the small things, the Greeks were saying. They are sometimes more dangerous than the monsters. Sleep gently. The Minotaur is dead. The thread leads out. But remember to change the sail. The story continues. Long before the time of Theseus, in another corner of Greece, there was a king who had a problem. His name was King Icarus. He had no son. He had only a daughter, named Danae. He went to an oracle to ask whether he would ever have a male heir. The oracle gave him an answer he did not want. The oracle said that Icarus would have no sons. But more troubling, the oracle said that one day, the son of his daughter Danae would kill him. Icarus was terrified. He did not want to die. He did not want his grandson to be the cause. So he took drastic action. He locked his daughter Danae in a bronze tower. No man could come to her. She could not marry. She could not bear a child. The prophecy would be impossible. But the gods are not so easily blocked. Zeus, the king of the gods, saw Danae in her tower. He desired her. He came to her, in some versions, as a shower of golden light that streamed in through the high window. He visited her in secret again and again. Eventually, Danae bore a child, a son. She named him Perseus. When King Icarus discovered what had happened, he was beside himself. He did not dare to kill his own daughter and grandson directly. He feared the gods. So he came up with another solution. He locked Danae and the baby Perseus into a wooden chest, and he had them cast into the sea. Let the waves take them. Let the gods decide their fate. The chest drifted. It floated for days. Eventually, it washed up on the shore of an island called Seriphos. A fisherman named Dictys found it. He opened it. He found a woman and a baby inside. He took them home. He raised the boy as his own. Perseus grew up on Seriphos. He grew strong and quick. He was beloved of the fisher folk who had taken him in. But the ruler of Seriphos was a different kind of man. King Polydectes, brother of the kind fisherman, was cruel and treacherous. He saw the beautiful Danae. He wanted her. But Perseus, her son, now grown, would defend her. Polydectes needed to get rid of Perseus. Polydectes devised a scheme. He told Perseus, in front of a court of witnesses, that he was about to marry, and he demanded a wedding gift from every young man at court. The other young men gave horses. Perseus had no horse. Polydectes pretended to be insulted. He demanded an impossible gift, the head of Medusa. Medusa was one of 3 sisters known as the Gorgons. She had snakes for hair. Her gaze turned anyone who looked at her into stone. She lived at the far edge of the world, in a cave surrounded by the statues of those who had tried to kill her and failed. To bring back her head was, in the king's calculation, the same as condemning Perseus to death. Perseus accepted the challenge. He left Seriphos. He set out on the most dangerous journey of his life. The gods, however, took an interest in him. He was, after all, the son of Zeus. Athena came to him. She gave him a polished bronze shield, like a mirror. He was to use it to see Medusa without looking at her directly. Hermes came to him. He gave him winged sandals so he could fly. He gave him a sword sharp enough to cut through any neck. But Perseus needed more. He needed to know exactly where the Gorgons lived. He needed certain items that only the Gree knew the location of. The Gree were 3 old witches, sisters of the Gorgons, who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them, passing them back and forth. Perseus found the Gree. He waited. When they passed the eye between them, he snatched it. He held it ransom. He told them he would not return it until they told him what he needed to know. The Gree had no choice. They told him. They sent him to the Stygian nymphs, who possessed the items he would need. From the nymphs, Perseus obtained the cap of invisibility, which would let him approach the Gorgons unseen. He obtained a special bag, which could hold the Gorgon's head without being affected by it. With these, plus the gifts of Athena and Hermes, he was ready. Perseus flew on his winged sandals to the cave of the Gorgons. He saw the statues, the dozens of stone figures of men who had come before him and failed. He saw the entrance. He put on the cap of invisibility. He entered the cave. The 3 Gorgon sisters lay sleeping. 2 of them were immortal. Medusa was the only one who could be killed. Perseus identified her. She had the snakes for hair, where the others were monstrous in different ways. Perseus held up his polished shield. He looked at Medusa's reflection in the shield. He approached her, walking backward, watching her image in the mirror. He raised his sword. He brought it down. The blade cut through her neck. The head came free. The other 2 Gorgons woke instantly. They rose in fury. But Perseus was already grabbing Medusa's head, putting it in the bag, putting on the cap of invisibility again, flying out of the cave. The Gorgons could not find him. He escaped. On his way home, Perseus had several more adventures. He saw a young woman chained to a rock by the sea, about to be devoured by a sea monster. Her name was Andromeda. She was the daughter of a king who had been forced to sacrifice her to appease a god. Perseus killed the sea monster, using Medusa's head, in some versions, to turn it to stone. He freed Andromeda. He married her. When Perseus returned to Seriphos, he found that King Polydectes had been harassing his mother, trying to force her to marry him. Perseus walked into the king's court. He held up Medusa's head. Polydectes and his cruel followers were turned to stone. They remained stone, in some versions of the story, standing in a courtyard on Seriphos to this day. Perseus gave Medusa's head to Athena, who put it on her shield, where it served as a powerful weapon for the rest of her existence. He gave back the winged sandals and the cap of invisibility. He took his mother and his new wife Andromeda back to Argos, where his grandfather King Acrisius still ruled. The old prophecy had not been forgotten. When King Acrisius heard that his grandson had returned, he fled the city in terror. He did not want to die, but Perseus did not pursue him. Years later, Perseus happened to be participating in athletic games in another city. He threw a discus. The discus, by some terrible accident, or perhaps by fate, flew off course. It struck an old man in the stands. The old man died. The old man was King Acrisius. The grandfather Perseus had never killed deliberately. The prophecy had fulfilled itself, after all, through accident. This is the story the Greeks told to explain how the impossible always finds its way to becoming true. How the things we run from come for us anyway. How fate is patient, and accidents are sometimes not accidents at all. Sleep gently. The world is full of monsters with snakes for hair. The trick is to use the mirror, not the direct gaze. Look at things from an angle. Approach them with cleverness. The direct stare turns us to stone. The story continues. This is the story of the strongest man who ever lived, and the impossible tasks he had to perform. His name was Heracles. He was the son of Zeus, born from a mortal mother. Zeus loved him from the beginning, but Hera, the wife of Zeus, hated him from the beginning. Hera was jealous of every child Zeus fathered with mortal women, and Heracles was the most famous of all of them. Hera spent his life trying to destroy him. Even when Heracles was a baby in his cradle, Hera sent two great serpents to kill him. They slithered into his nursery in the night. They wrapped around the cradle. They prepared to strike. The baby Heracles, instead of being afraid, grabbed the serpents, one in each tiny hand, and squeezed. He killed them both. He laughed. He grew up to be the strongest man who had ever lived. No human could match him in combat. No animal could outrun him. No weight could be too heavy for his arms to lift. He was a force of nature in human form. But Hera was not done. When Heracles was a young man, married with children, Hera caused him to fall into a fit of madness. In a madness, he did not recognize his own family. He saw them as enemies. He attacked them. He killed his wife and his children before the madness lifted and he saw what he had done. He was destroyed. He fell at the feet of his family's bodies and wept. He could not bear the weight of what had happened. He wanted to die, but the gods would not let him die. Instead, he was sent to the oracle at Delphi to ask what he should do. The oracle told him he must atone. He must perform service to a king named Eurystheus, his cousin, for 12 years. Eurystheus would assign him tasks. Whatever the tasks were, Heracles must complete them. Only after completing all of them could he be cleansed of his crime. Eurystheus was a small and weak man who hated Heracles for being the stronger of the two. He delighted in giving Heracles impossible tasks. He hoped each one would kill him. The first labor was the Nemean lion. This was a beast that had been terrorizing the countryside. Its hide was impervious to any weapon. Heracles tracked the lion. He cornered it in its cave. He could not pierce its hide with arrows or sword. So he wrestled it. He strangled it with his bare hands. He killed it. Then, with the lion's own claws, the only thing sharp enough to cut its hide, he skinned it. He wore the hide as a cloak for the rest of his life. The second labor was the Lernaean Hydra, a serpentine creature with 9 heads that lived in a swamp. Whenever one head was cut off, 2 more grew in its place. Heracles brought his nephew Iolaus with him. After Heracles cut off each head, Iolaus would burn the stump with a torch. The burns prevented new heads from growing. Heracles killed the Hydra. He dipped his arrows in its poisonous blood, which would later cause both great victories and great tragedies. The third labor was the Ceryneian hind, a deer with golden antlers, sacred to Artemis. Eurystheus thought this would be easy, but the deer was so swift that no one could catch it. Heracles pursued it for a year before finally capturing it. He was careful to bring it back alive, knowing that Artemis would be furious if it were harmed. He brought it to Eurystheus. He let it go again afterward. The fourth labor was the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous wild pig that lived on Mount Erymanthus. Heracles tracked it through deep snow. He drove it from its lair. He chased it into a snowbank where it became stuck. He bound it and carried it back to Eurystheus on his shoulders. Eurystheus, terrified at the sight of the great beast, hid in a bronze jar. The fifth labor was the Augean stables. King Augeas had a herd of 3,000 cattle. Their stables had not been cleaned in 30 years. The smell could be smelled from miles away. The dung was deep. Eurystheus thought he could humiliate Heracles by setting him to shovel manure. Heracles instead diverted 2 rivers. He dug channels. The rivers flowed through the stables. The water washed everything away in a single day. The labor was completed not by strength, but by cleverness. The sixth labor was the Stymphalian birds, a flock of bronze-feathered birds with beaks like spears that lived around a remote lake. They attacked travelers. Heracles received from Athena a great pair of bronze castanets. He clashed them together. The birds were so startled that they all flew up at once. Heracles shot many of them with his arrows. The rest fled, never to return. The seventh labor was the Cretan bull, a great white bull that was destroying crops on the island of Crete. King Midas was glad to be rid of it. Heracles tracked the bull. He wrestled it to the ground. He bound it and brought it back to Eurystheus, again forcing the king to hide. The eighth labor was the Mares of Diomedes. A king named Diomedes kept 4 flesh-eating horses, which he fed on the bodies of travelers. Heracles fought Diomedes. He defeated him. He fed Diomedes himself to the horses, after which they became tame. He brought them back to Eurystheus. The ninth labor was the belt of Hippolyta. Hippolyta was the queen of the Amazons, a tribe of female warriors. She wore a sacred belt given to her by Ares, the god of war. Heracles was sent to obtain it. Hippolyta, impressed by Heracles, was actually willing to give him the belt as a gift. But Hera, still meddling, stirred up the Amazons. They attacked Heracles. He was forced to fight. He killed Hippolyta in the battle. He took the belt and returned. The 10th labor was the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was a giant with 3 bodies who lived on a far island, with a herd of red cattle. Heracles traveled to the island. He killed Geryon. He killed the giant's 2-headed dog and his shepherd. He drove the cattle back across the entire breadth of the ancient world, fending off thieves and beasts at every turn, until he delivered them to Eurystheus. These 10 labors took years. Heracles thought he was finished, but Eurystheus, in his cruelty, declared that 2 of the labors had not counted. The Hydra, because Iolaus had helped. The Augean stables, because Heracles had asked Augeas for payment. So 2 more labors were added. The 11th labor was the apples of the Hesperides, golden apples that grew in a sacred garden at the far western edge of the world. Heracles did not know the way. He wandered for months. He met many people. He freed Prometheus, as we have heard, from the cliff in the Caucasus. Prometheus, in gratitude, told him the way to the garden and warned him not to pick the apples himself, but to have someone else do it. Heracles continued on. He came to the place where Atlas, the Titan, held up the sky on his shoulders. Heracles offered to take the sky for a moment if Atlas would fetch the apples for him. Atlas agreed eagerly. He had been holding the sky for a very long time. Heracles took the weight of the sky on his shoulders. The weight was tremendous. Atlas went and picked the apples. Atlas came back, but Atlas, free of the weight for the first time in centuries, did not want to take it back. He offered to deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself. Heracles, thinking quickly, pretended to agree, but asked Atlas to take the sky just for a moment so he could adjust his shoulder cushioning. Atlas foolishly took the sky back. Heracles picked up the apples and walked away. Atlas was left with the sky once more. The 12th labor was Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the gates of the underworld. Heracles was to go to the underworld and bring Cerberus back alive. He descended. He passed Charon. He came to the throne of Hades. He asked for permission. Hades surprisingly granted it, on the condition that Heracles take Cerberus without weapons. Heracles fought the great dog with his bare hands. He wrestled it. He brought it back to Eurystheus. Eurystheus, when he saw Cerberus, hid again in a bronze jar and shouted from inside that the labors were complete. Heracles could return Cerberus to the underworld. Heracles had finished. The 12 labors were done. His punishment was finished. His honor was restored. But his life after the labors was not happy. He was a giant of man trying to live an ordinary life. He had moments of joy. He had moments of great rage that destroyed those around him. He fell in love many times. His final death came from a tunic poisoned with the blood of a centaur he had killed years before. The centaur, dying, had tricked Heracles' wife into believing the poisoned blood would keep her husband faithful. She gave him the tunic. It burned him to death. In his final moments, Heracles built his own funeral pyre. He lay down on it. He had the pyre lit. As his mortal body burned away, his immortal half, the half from his father Zeus, was lifted into the heavens. He was made a god. He took his place among the Olympians. Even Hera, eventually, made her peace with him. He married Hera's daughter Hebe, the goddess of youth. He found, at last, in the divine realms, the peace that his mortal life had never given him. This is the story of the strongest man who ever lived. It is a story about what it costs to be that strong, about how strength is not the same as happiness, about how a life of impossible tasks ends eventually, but the marks of it remain. Sleep gently. You do not have to be a Heracles. The labors of ordinary life are enough. You are strong enough for what is in front of you tonight. Tomorrow there will be more. You will be strong enough for that too. The story continues. Far across the sea from Greece, on the coast of what is now Turkey, there stood a great city. Its name was Troy. It was wealthy, well fortified, and ruled by a wise king named Priam. The king had many sons. The most famous of them was Hector, brave and noble, and another named Paris, who was handsome and reckless. The story of the Trojan War begins, in the way of these stories, with the gods. The goddess of strife was named Eris. She had not been invited to a wedding. The wedding was the marriage of Peleus, a mortal king, to Thetis, the sea nymph. We have heard of this before. It was the marriage Zeus had decided to arrange after Prometheus warned him that his own pairing with Thetis would produce a son who would overthrow him. The wedding was a great occasion. All the gods came, except Eris. Furious at being snubbed, Eris came anyway, uninvited. She threw a golden apple into the middle of the celebration. The apple bore the inscription, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses claimed the apple. Hera, queen of the gods. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. They demanded that someone judge between them. They asked Zeus. Zeus wisely refused. He sent them to a mortal, a young shepherd named Paris, who was watching his flocks on the slopes of Mount Ida. Paris would be the judge. The three goddesses came to Paris. Each offered him a bribe. Hera offered him power, kingship over all of Asia. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in battle. Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world as his wife. Paris was young. He was a shepherd, with no immediate use for kingship or for wisdom. He wanted love. He gave the apple to Aphrodite. Aphrodite kept her promise. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, queen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. Aphrodite arranged for Paris, who, it turned out, was actually a prince of Troy who had been raised as a shepherd because of an unlucky prophecy, to visit Sparta. While there, with Aphrodite's help, Paris carried Helen back to Troy. Whether Helen went willingly or was abducted, the stories disagree. But she went. King Menelaus was furious. His wife had been stolen. He went to his brother Agamemnon, the high king of all the Greek states. Agamemnon called on every Greek king who had ever sworn loyalty to him. They gathered their armies. They built 1,000 ships. They sailed across the Aegean Sea to make war on Troy. The Greek heroes who came to fight at Troy were the greatest of their generation. Agamemnon, the high king, commanded the army. Menelaus, the wronged husband. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, famous for his cunning. Diomedes, second only to Achilles in skill at arms. Ajax, a giant of a man. Nestor, an old king valued for his wisdom. And Achilles, the greatest warrior who had ever lived, the son of the goddess Thetis, invulnerable except for his heel. The siege of Troy lasted 10 years. 10 years of battle outside the walls. 10 years of the Greeks unable to take the city, the Trojans unable to drive them away. The most famous moments of the war are not the great battles. They're the small moments of grief and rage and pride. There was the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. Agamemnon had taken a captured woman as his prize of war. The girl's father, a priest of Apollo, prayed for her return. Apollo sent a plague to the Greek camp. Many died. Agamemnon was forced to return the girl. But in his anger, he took Achilles' prize, another captive woman, named Briseis, whom Achilles had loved. Achilles was insulted. He withdrew from the fighting. He sat in his tent with his men, refusing to fight for many days. Without Achilles, the Greeks were nearly defeated. The Trojans, led by Hector, pushed them back to their ships. The ships began to burn. The Greeks were on the edge of disaster. Achilles' dearest friend, Patroclus, could not bear it. He begged Achilles to let him take Achilles' armor and lead the Myrmidons, Achilles' own troops, into battle. Achilles agreed. Patroclus put on the armor. He went out. The Trojans, seeing what they thought was Achilles, fled in panic. Patroclus drove them back to the walls of Troy. But there he met Hector. Hector killed him, stripped him of his armor, Achilles' armor, and took it as a trophy. When Achilles heard the news, his grief became fury. He had hated Agamemnon. Now he hated Hector more. He returned to the battle. His mother Thetis had new armor made for him by Hephaestus, the craftsman god. Achilles strapped it on. He took the field. The Trojans fled before him. He killed dozens, hundreds. He drove them back to the walls. He met Hector outside the gates. The two greatest warriors of the war faced each other. They circled. They fought. Achilles, faster and more skilled, eventually killed Hector. He dragged the body behind his chariot around the walls of Troy, where Hector's parents and wife watched in horror. But even Achilles, in time, would meet his end. The god Apollo guided an arrow shot by Paris, that same Paris who had started the war, into Achilles' heel, the one vulnerable spot. The greatest warrior died. The war continued. The Greeks could not take the walls of Troy by force. Odysseus, the cunning one, devised a plan. He had a great wooden horse built, big enough to hold 30 warriors inside. The Greek army then pretended to leave. They sailed their ships out of sight. They left the horse on the beach. The Trojans came out to inspect. They thought they had won. They thought the Greeks had given up. They saw the horse as a parting gift, an offering to the gods. They brought it into the city. That night, while the Trojans celebrated their victory, the warriors hidden in the horse climbed out. They opened the gates of the city from inside. The Greek army, which had returned in the night, poured in. The slaughter was terrible. The city was sacked. The men were killed. The women and children were taken as slaves. The temples were burned. Troy fell. 10 years of war. Thousands of dead. A city destroyed. And all of it began with a golden apple, a vanity competition between 3 goddesses, a young shepherd making a foolish choice, a husband refusing to be cuckolded. The Greeks who survived sailed home. But the gods have been angered by what happened during the sack of the city. Many of the Greek heroes would face hardships on their way back. Agamemnon returned to Mycenae to find his wife Clytemnestra had taken a lover during his 10-year absence. She killed him in his bath on the day of his return. Their children would later avenge his death by killing their mother. Other heroes returned with their lives intact, but their names forever associated with the destruction they had caused. The brutality of the war had marked them. And one hero, Odysseus, the cunning architect of the wooden horse, would not return for another 10 years. His journey home is the next story. Sleep gently. The greatest cities can fall. The greatest warriors can die. Even the gods quarrel over apples. None of us is too small to be caught in their quarrels, and none of us is too great to escape them. The story continues. Odysseus, king of the small Greek island of Ithaca, had left his home 20 years before. 10 years to fight at Troy. 10 years to find his way home. The reason it took 10 years to make a journey that should have taken weeks is the story of the Odyssey. It begins after the fall of Troy. Odysseus and his men sail away from the ruined city with their share of the loot. They are headed home. They expect a few months at sea. Their first stop is the land of the Cyclades. They raid a town for supplies. They drink too much. The men of the surrounding villages come to defend their neighbors. The Greeks are driven off, having lost a number of men. They sail on. A storm catches them. They drift for days. They land on the island of the Lotus Eaters, a people who survive on a kind of fruit that, when eaten, makes the eater forget all desires except the desire to eat more of the fruit. 3 of Odysseus's men eat the fruit. They lose all interest in going home. Odysseus has to drag them back to the ship and tie them to the benches. They sail to the island of the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants. They go to a cave that looks promising for supplies. The cave belongs to a cyclops named Polyphemus, who is the son of the sea god Poseidon. Polyphemus returns. He blocks the entrance to the cave with a massive boulder. He eats 2 of Odysseus's men for dinner. He plans to eat the rest over the following days. Odysseus is desperate. He cannot kill the Cyclops outright because then no one could move the boulder blocking the entrance. He needs a plan. He gets the Cyclops drunk on wine. When the Cyclops asks for his name, Odysseus says, "My name is Nobody." When the Cyclops falls into a drunken sleep, Odysseus and his men sharpen a long pole. They thrust it into the Cyclops' single eye. They blind him. The Cyclops howls in pain. Other Cyclopes hear and call out, asking who is hurting him. He shouts back, "Nobody is hurting me." The other Cyclopes assume he is fine and go away. The next morning, the Cyclops opens the cave to let his sheep out to graze. He sits at the entrance, feeling each sheep to make sure no human escapes. Odysseus and his men cling to the underside of the sheep, gripping the wool. They are carried out beneath the animals. Once on the ship, Odysseus cannot resist. He shouts back to the blinded Cyclops, "It was Odysseus of Ithaca who blinded you." The Cyclops hears this. He prays to his father Poseidon for revenge. Poseidon listens. From that moment on, Odysseus has the god of the sea as his enemy. The journey home, which should have been a few weeks, becomes a journey of 10 years. They reach the island of Aeolus, god of the winds. Aeolus gives Odysseus a bag containing all the contrary winds, leaving only a steady west wind to push him home. They sail. They almost make it. They're within sight of Ithaca. But while Odysseus is asleep, his crew, suspecting he is hiding treasure in the bag, opens it. All the winds rush out. They are blown back across the sea, all the way to where they started. They reach the island of the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who destroy all of Odysseus's ships except his own. The crew is reduced from a dozen ships to one. They reach the island of Circe, a sorceress who turns men into pigs. She turns most of Odysseus's crew into pigs. Odysseus, warned by Hermes and given a magical herb, resists her enchantment. He confronts her. She, impressed, releases his men and becomes his ally. They stay with her for a year. When they finally leave, Circe tells Odysseus he must visit the underworld before he can sail home. He goes. He speaks with the dead. He meets his own mother, who died while he was away. He had not known. He meets Achilles, who tells him that death is a bitter thing, that he would rather be the lowest slave in the living world than king of all the dead. The journey continues. They sail past the sirens, beautiful creatures whose singing lures sailors onto rocks. Odysseus, curious, has his men plug their own ears with wax. They tie him to the mast so he cannot escape. He hears the songs. He longs to go. He struggles against the ropes. But the ship sails past. They pass between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is a six-headed monster that lives in a cliff. Charybdis is a whirlpool. Odysseus chooses to lose 6 men to Scylla rather than lose the whole ship to Charybdis. 6 of his crew are eaten. They land on the island of Helios, the sun god. They are forbidden from eating Helios's cattle. While Odysseus is away, his men, starving, kill some of the cattle. Helios complains to Zeus. Zeus strikes their ship with lightning when they sail. Everyone drowns except Odysseus. Odysseus, alone, washes up on the island of the nymph Calypso. She falls in love with him. She keeps him for 7 years. She offers him immortality if he will stay with her. He refuses. He wants to go home. He misses his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. After 7 years, the gods finally tell Calypso to release him. She builds him a raft. He sails. He is shipwrecked one more time. He washes ashore on the island of the Phaeacians. They are kind to him. They take him in. He tells them his story over a long evening. They are amazed. They give him a ship. They sail him home. When Odysseus finally arrives in Ithaca, 20 years have passed since he left. He is in disguise. His son Telemachus, who was a baby when Odysseus left, is now a grown man. His wife Penelope has been holding off suitors, hundreds of men who have come to her court, eating her food, demanding she marry one of them, declaring that Odysseus must be dead. Odysseus, in disguise as an old beggar, enters his own palace. He sees the suitors. He sees his wife, still loyal. He sees his son, courageous. He waits for the right moment. Penelope, weary of the suitors, announces a contest. She will marry whichever man can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. The suitors try one by one. None can even string the bow. The beggar, Odysseus, asks if he might try. The suitors laugh. They allow it. Odysseus strings the bow easily. He shoots the arrow through the 12 axe heads. Then he turns the bow on the suitors. He kills them all, with help from his son and a few loyal servants. He reveals himself to Penelope. She is cautious. There are impostors in the world. But he proves himself by mentioning details of their marriage bed that only he could know. She weeps. She embraces him. The journey is over. This is the Odyssey, the journey home. The cleverness of man trying to survive monsters and gods and his own crew's mistakes. The patience of a wife waiting for 20 years. The growing up of a son who never knew his father. The endurance in the face of obstacles that seemed designed by the gods themselves, of a man who would not give up on going home. The Greeks loved this story most of all their stories. They saw in Odysseus the human capacity for cleverness, for endurance, for the long return to the home and the family that is always more important than any glory abroad. Sleep gently. The journey home in life is sometimes the longest journey. The monsters and the storms come. The years pass. But there is somewhere a home to return to. Whether it is a place or a person or a state of mind, the return is always worth the journey. The story continues to its close. There are more stories yet. 5 more before we close, each shorter than what has come before. Each its own small, completed thing. The first is the story of King Midas and the Golden Touch. King Midas was the ruler of a kingdom called Phrygia. He was a foolish man, more interested in his own wealth than in the well-being of his people. One day, the god Dionysus passed through his lands. Dionysus had a companion, an old satyr named Silenus, who had wandered off and gotten lost. Midas found Silenus, fed him, gave him a place to sleep, and returned him to Dionysus. Dionysus, grateful, offered Midas a reward. Midas could ask for anything at all. Dionysus would grant it. Midas did not have to think long. He had thought about this kind of question many times. He asked for the power to turn anything he touched into gold. Dionysus warned him. He told Midas this was not a wise wish. But Midas insisted. Dionysus shrugged and granted the gift. Midas went home delighted. He touched the doorframe. It turned to gold. He touched the chairs. They turned to gold. He touched the curtains. They turned to gold. By the end of the first hour, his entire palace was made of gold. He was the richest king in the world. He sat down at dinner. He reached for an apple. The apple turned to gold the moment his fingers touched it. He could not bite it. The gold was solid through. He reached for bread. The bread turned to gold the moment he touched it. He could not eat it. He reached for wine. The wine turned to gold the moment it touched his lips. He could not drink it. He began to panic. His daughter, whom he loved, heard the strange sounds from the dining hall and came to see what was wrong. She ran to her father to comfort him. She touched him. She turned to gold. A statue stood where his daughter had been. Midas wept. He fell at the foot of his frozen, gilded daughter. He cursed the gift he had asked for. He cursed his own greed. He prayed to Dionysus. He begged the god to take back the gift. Dionysus, who had warned him, took pity. He told Midas to bathe in a particular river to wash away the curse. Midas ran to the river. He bathed. The gold dissolved from his skin into the river. Even today, in some versions of the tale, the river still glitters with flecks of gold. Midas's daughter, when he ran back home and touched her again, was restored to flesh. She did not remember being a statue. She lived, but Midas, for the rest of his life, never again touched gold by his own choice. He gave his treasures away. He lived simply. He had learned, finally, that there are things more valuable than wealth. This is the story of King Midas. The Greeks told it to warn against greed. The man who wishes for unlimited wealth will lose everything he actually loves. Sleep gently. The thing you reach for is sometimes not the thing you actually want. The second story is of Echo and Narcissus. Echo was a mountain nymph. She had a talent for talking. She could carry on conversations indefinitely, delight in her own cleverness, hold an audience captive with her stories. But her gift became her curse. The goddess Hera was suspicious that her husband Zeus was having affairs with the mountain nymphs. Echo, who could talk for hours, often distracted Hera with long conversations, letting Zeus slip away unnoticed. Eventually, Hera realized what was happening. She cursed Echo. From that moment on, Echo could not start a conversation. She could only repeat the last words spoken by someone else. Echo, robbed of her voice, fell in love with a beautiful young man named Narcissus. Narcissus was, perhaps, the most beautiful young man in the world. But he was also famously vain. Many nymphs and mortals had fallen in love with him. He had rejected them all. He had no use for anyone but himself. Echo, watching him from behind trees, could not speak to him. She could only repeat his words. He passed near her. He called out, "Is anyone there?" She could only say, "Anyone there?" He said, "Come here." She could only say, "Here." He saw her. She emerged. She tried to embrace him. Narcissus pushed her away in disgust. He told her he would rather die than be touched by her. He walked off. Echo, broken-hearted, retreated to the mountains. She wasted away from grief. Her body disappeared. Only her voice remained. Even today, in some valleys, you can still hear her, the repeated final words of whatever you call out into the rocky places. The goddess Nemesis, watching all this, was angered by Narcissus's cruelty. She decided to punish him. She arranged for him to come upon a still pool of water in a forest clearing. He bent down to drink. He saw his own reflection in the water. He had never seen himself clearly before. He had heard people speak of his beauty, but he had not known. Now he saw it. He fell instantly in love with himself. He stayed by the pool. He could not leave. He tried to embrace his reflection. He could not. Every time he reached into the water, the image dissolved. He tried to kiss it. He could not. He tried to speak with it. It only mouthed his words back without sound. He stayed by the pool. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He wasted away. Eventually, he died there, on the bank, gazing at his own face. A flower grew where he had died, white petals around a yellow center. The Greeks named the flower after him, Narcissus. The flower we still call Narcissus today, the early spring bloom that grows by the edges of ponds. It is named for the boy who could not love anyone but himself and who died of his own beauty. Sleep gently. The thing in the water is not the thing it appears to be. The image of yourself is not the same as yourself. Reach for what is real, not what is reflected. The third story is of Jason and the Golden Fleece. In a far corner of the ancient world, in a land called Colchis, hung a treasure of great power, the Golden Fleece. The skin of a magical golden ram hung in a sacred grove, guarded by a dragon that never slept. The fleece had once belonged to a Greek prince who had ridden the ram to safety across the sea, escaping a wicked stepmother. The ram had been sacrificed in Colchis. The fleece had been hung in the grove. It had been there for generations. In Greece, in the kingdom of Iolcus, a prince named Jason had been deprived of his throne. His uncle Peleus had taken it. Peleus was suspicious of any claim Jason might make. He devised a task. If Jason brought back the Golden Fleece, Peleus would give him the throne. The task was impossible. The fleece was far away. The dragon could not be killed by any normal weapon. The kingdom of Colchis was hostile to outsiders. Jason accepted anyway. He commissioned a great ship. He gathered the heroes of his generation as crew. The ship was called the Argo. The crew became known as the Argonauts. They included Heracles, Orpheus, Castor and Pollux, Atalanta the Huntress, and dozens of other famous warriors. They set sail. Their journey took them through many adventures. They passed the clashing rocks, two great stones that crashed together to crush any ship that tried to pass between them. They sent a dove through first. The rocks crashed, missed the dove's tail by inches, and recoiled. While they were recoiling, the Argo slipped through. They escaped. They came to the land of King Phineus, an old prophet tormented by harpies, winged creatures that stole his food before he could eat it. The Argonauts drove the harpies away. Phineus, grateful, gave Jason advice for the journey ahead. They came to the land of the Amazons. They survived. They came to the land of the Mariandini. They survived. Eventually, they arrived in Colchis. The king of Colchis was named Eats. He was suspicious. He told Jason that he could have the golden fleece, but only if Jason could complete a series of trials. Plow a field with 2 fire-breathing bulls. Sow the field with dragon's teeth. Defeat the army of armored warriors that would rise from the teeth. Each task was impossible. Jason looked at the king with despair. But the king had a daughter. Her name was Medea. She was a powerful sorceress. She fell in love with Jason at first sight. She came to him in secret. She offered to help him. Medea gave Jason a magical ointment that protected him from fire. She gave him advice about the warriors. When they rose from the teeth, he should throw a stone among them. They would fight each other rather than him. Jason completed both tasks with Medea's help. The king Eats, angered, refused to give the fleece anyway. He plotted to kill Jason in the night. Medea, sensing this, helped Jason steal the fleece. She put the dragon to sleep with her magic. Jason took the fleece from the grove. They escaped together on the Argo. But the journey home was hard. King Eats pursued them. Medea, to slow her father's pursuit, did a terrible thing. She had brought her young brother along on the escape. She killed him, dismembered his body, and threw the pieces into the sea. The king, finding the pieces, had to stop and gather them for burial. The Argo escaped. Jason and Medea returned to Iolcus with the fleece. Jason demanded his throne, but King Peleus refused to give it up. Medea, in her cunning, helped Jason again. She convinced Peleus' own daughters that they could restore their father's youth by cutting him into pieces and boiling him in a magical pot. They did it. Peleus died. The daughters realized too late what they had done, but the murder was traced to Medea. Jason and Medea were exiled. They went to Corinth. In Corinth, they lived for years. They had children, but Jason eventually grew tired of Medea. She had a reputation that troubled him. He arranged to marry a different princess, a young Corinthian woman whose father could give him a throne in Corinth. Medea was destroyed. She had given up everything for Jason, her father, her brother, her homeland. He was now leaving her for political advantage. She took her revenge. She sent the bride a poisoned robe. The bride put it on. The robe burned her alive. She also killed her own 2 children, Jason's children, to wound him more deeply than anything else could. Then she fled in a chariot drawn by dragons, vanishing into the air. Jason was left with nothing. He had the throne he had sought, but he had lost his wife, his children, his honor. Years later, sitting beneath the rotting hull of his old ship the Argo, a piece of the ship fell on his head and killed him. This is the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece. The Greeks told it as a story about ambition and about what we lose when we use other people to get what we want. Jason got the fleece. He got the throne. He lost everything else. Medea destroyed him from inside. Sleep gently. The treasures of the world come at a cost. The people who help us along the way deserve more than we sometimes remember to give them. The 4th story is of Phaeton and the sun chariot. Phaeton was the son of Helios, the sun god. His mother was a mortal woman. He had grown up not entirely believing his lineage. His friends teased him. They said his mother had made up the story of his divine father. One day, Phaeton went to his mother and demanded the truth. She told him his father was Helios. To prove it, she sent him to the palace of the sun, far in the east, where Helios began his daily journey across the sky. Phaeton traveled to the palace. He saw Helios on his great throne, surrounded by the four seasons. Phaeton explained who he was. Helios, full of fatherly love, welcomed him. He embraced the boy. He acknowledged him as his son. Helios, in his joy, offered to grant Phaeton any wish. Anything at all, whatever the boy wanted, he could have as proof of Helios's love. Phaeton had a wish ready. He wanted to drive the sun chariot. Just for one day, he wanted to cross the sky from east to west, controlling the four immortal horses, bringing daylight to the world. Helios was horrified. He begged Phaeton to ask for anything else. The sun chariot was beyond the strength of any mortal to control. The horses were wild. The path through the sky was narrow. Disaster would follow, but Phaeton had been promised. Helios could not break his promise. Reluctantly, he prepared the chariot. He gave Phaeton every warning he could. Keep to the middle path. Do not go too high. Do not go too low. Hold the reins firmly. Do not let the horses run away with you. Phaeton climbed into the chariot. The horses leaped forward. They felt immediately that the driver was not their usual master. The reins were lighter. The voice was unfamiliar. They sensed weakness. They ran wild. They climbed too high. The earth grew cold. Then they plunged too low. The earth burned. Forests caught fire. Lakes evaporated. Rivers dried. The chariot zigzagged across the sky. Phaeton screamed in terror, but could not regain control. The earth was being destroyed. Mountains were melting. Cities were burning. Zeus, watching from Olympus, had to act. He could not allow the world to be destroyed. He took his thunderbolt. He hurled it at the chariot. The bolt struck Phaeton. The boy was thrown from the chariot. He fell, burning, through the sky, and crashed into a river far below. He died. The horses, free of the chariot, returned to their stables on their own. The chariot crashed. Helios was inconsolable. For a full day, he refused to drive the chariot. The world was in darkness. Finally, Zeus persuaded him to return. But the wounds of that day remained on the earth. The deserts of Africa, the Greeks said, had been created by Phaeton's wild ride. The heat had scorched everything. The skin of the people who lived under those overheated skies had darkened in the burning. The rivers that ran dry never quite came back. Phaeton's mother and sisters, mourning him, wept by the river where he had fallen. They wept for so long that they were transformed into trees. Poplars, their tears, falling into the river, became amber. The Greeks said that all the amber in the world came from the tears of Phaeton's sisters, still weeping for their brother. This is the story of Phaeton. The Greeks told it as a warning against asking for things beyond our power to handle. Some wishes granted become disasters. Some powers are not meant for mortals. The middle path, for chariots, for ambition, for life, is the path that holds. Sleep gently. Do not ask for what you cannot handle. The wild horses sense weakness. The middle path is the path that holds. The fifth story is of Cupid and Psyche. Long after the time of the great heroes, when most of the gods had become quiet and the world had settled into its later forms, there was a king with 3 daughters. The youngest was named Psyche. Her name means soul. Psyche was so beautiful that people came from all over the kingdom to look at her. They began to compare her to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. They said Psyche was even more beautiful than the goddess. They began to neglect Aphrodite's temples to come to Psyche's house and worship her instead. Aphrodite was furious. No mortal should be compared to a goddess. She called her son Cupid, also known as Eros, the god of love and desire, and told him to make Psyche fall in love with the ugliest, lowest creature in the world. She wanted Psyche humiliated. Cupid took his bow and arrows. He flew to Psyche's house. He found her sleeping. He prepared to shoot her with one of his arrows that caused desperate, ridiculous love. But as he leaned over her, he was startled by her beauty. He scratched himself with his own arrow. He fell in love with her instantly. Now there was a problem. Cupid was supposed to humiliate Psyche, not love her. He could not bring himself to do what his mother demanded. But he also could not tell his mother what had happened. He arranged things secretly. He had the wind carry Psyche away to a remote palace in a hidden valley. He visited her there, but only in darkness. He told her she was his wife. He made love to her in the night. He left before dawn. He told her, sternly, that she must never try to see his face. She must trust him. She must never light a lamp in his presence. Psyche lived this strange life for many months. She was rich. She had every comfort. She had a loving husband who came to her only in the dark. But she did not know who he was. She was lonely. Her sisters visited her. They were envious. They were also suspicious. They told her that her husband must be a monster. Why else would he insist on being seen only in darkness? They convinced her to take a lamp and a knife to bed. If he was a monster, she should kill him. If he was beautiful, she could relax. That night, Psyche took the lamp and the knife. She waited until her husband was asleep beside her. She lit the lamp. She held it up. She saw, lying beside her, the most beautiful young man in the world. Golden hair, soft features, a small bow and a quiver of arrows by his side. Her husband was Cupid himself. In her surprise, a drop of hot oil fell from the lamp onto Cupid's shoulder. He woke. He saw the lamp. He understood she had broken his only rule. He rose. He looked at her with great sorrow. He said only, "Love cannot live where trust does not." He took up his wings. He flew away. Psyche, devastated, set out to find him. She wandered the world. She prayed to every god she met. She begged them to help her find her husband. Eventually, she went to Aphrodite herself. The goddess was still angry, but she said she would give Psyche a chance to win Cupid back. There were 4 tasks. If Psyche completed all 4, Aphrodite would forgive her, and Cupid would be returned. The first task was to sort a vast pile of mixed grains into separate piles. Wheat, barley, lentils. Each must be separated. Aphrodite gave Psyche only one night. The task was impossible. Psyche wept. She sat by the pile, hopeless. But the ants of the field had pity on her. They organized themselves. They sorted the grains for her. By morning, the task was complete. The second task was to bring back wool from a flock of golden sheep. The sheep were violent and would attack any who came near. Psyche, despairing, sat by a riverbank. The reeds whispered to her. They told her to wait until midday, when the sheep would lie down to rest in the heat. Then she could gather wool from the bushes where the sheep had scraped against them. She did. She brought back the wool. The third task was to fill a crystal flask with water from the source of a river that ran through impossibly steep cliffs. The cliffs were guarded by dragons. Psyche could not climb them. The eagle of Zeus, watching her, had pity. He took the flask in his talons. He flew to the source. He filled the flask. He returned it to her. The fourth task was to descend to the underworld, to ask Persephone for a box of beauty ointment, to bring it back. Psyche was to put nothing of it on herself. Psyche, terrified, went to the underworld. She received the box from Persephone. She began the long climb back. As she climbed, she thought about the box. She was tired. She was worn from her journey. She was no longer beautiful. She had wept so much that her face was drawn and pale. She thought perhaps just a little of the ointment to restore some of her beauty, so she would be ready to see Cupid again if she found him. She opened the box. Inside was not beauty. Inside was an enchanted sleep, the sleep of the dead. It rose from the box and engulfed her. She felt the ground, breathing but unconscious, trapped in eternal sleep. But Cupid had been watching all along. He had recovered from his hurt. He had been waiting for her to complete her tasks. Now, seeing her fallen, he flew to her. He wiped the sleep from her face. He gathered the magical sleep back into the box. He kissed her awake. He took her to Zeus. He begged Zeus to allow her to become a goddess, so they could be together forever. Zeus, moved, agreed. Psyche drank the divine nectar. She became immortal. She and Cupid were married, formally, in the heavens. Aphrodite, finally, forgave them both. They lived happily as gods, ever after. This is the story of Cupid and Psyche, of love and trust, of trust broken and love almost lost, of the work it takes to rebuild trust once it has been broken, of the way that love, true love, eventually finds a way through every obstacle, but only if both lovers are willing to keep trying. Sleep gently. The soul wandering in the dark is finding its way home. Love is patient. So is the soul. These are the additional myths. 5 more stories to sit alongside the 10 you have already heard. The Greeks had hundreds more. Each god had stories. Each hero, each mountain, each river, each season, each star in the sky was once a mortal who had been transformed. Each constellation was a myth carved in light against the night. But 15 is enough for one night. The mind can only hold so many stories. The dreams can only weave so many threads. There are 3 more I want to tell you. 3 stories often overlooked, each short, each worth holding. The first is Apollo and Daphne. Apollo was the god of music, of poetry, of healing. He was beautiful and golden. He was rarely refused anything he wanted. One day Apollo encountered the young god Cupid with his bow and arrows. Apollo, in his arrogance, mocked Cupid. "Why does a child carry a bow?" he asked. "That weapon is for warriors and gods of consequence, not for little love archers." Cupid said nothing, but he was offended. He waited for his moment. Apollo continued on his way. He came to a forest. There, he saw a beautiful young woman walking. She was Daphne, a nymph, the daughter of a river god. She was wild and free, devoted to the goddess Artemis, sworn to remain unmarried. She loved the forest. She loved hunting. She had no interest in love or in being chased by gods. Cupid struck. He shot 2 arrows. The golden arrow of love hit Apollo. He fell instantly in love with Daphne. The leaden arrow of repulsion hit Daphne. She felt a strong, sudden revulsion toward Apollo. Apollo approached her. He confessed his love. He praised her beauty. He offered her gifts. He told her he was a god, son of Zeus, healer and musician. Daphne, terrified, ran. Apollo ran after her. He was a god. He was swift. He gained on her. He called out to her, asking her to slow down, to talk, to listen. She ran harder. Her hair came loose. Her clothes tore on branches. She did not look back. Apollo was almost upon her. She could feel his breath on her neck. She cried out to her father, the river god, for help. She begged for transformation. She would rather become anything than be caught. Her father heard her prayer. Her feet grew roots into the earth. Her arms became branches. Her hair became leaves. Her skin became bark. Her body became a tree, the laurel tree. Apollo, reaching for her, found his arms around the trunk of a tree. The bark was warm. Beneath the bark, he could feel a faint pulse, the last of her heart, before she became fully tree. He wept. He held the tree. He kissed its leaves. He vowed that, Since he could not have her as his bride, the laurel would be sacred to him forever. The leaves of the laurel would crown poets and victors. They would adorn the prizes of his sacred games. Where Apollo was honored, the laurel would grow. The laurel tree, today, is still called Daphne in Greek. It is still associated with Apollo. It is still used to crown athletes and writers. The wreath of laurel is what we now call the crown of glory. Sleep gently. Sometimes the way to escape what pursues us is to become something else entirely. The tree remembers what the nymph was. The wreath remembers what the tree once was. The second is Bellerophon and Pegasus. Bellerophon was a young prince from Corinth. He had killed a man in an accident and been sent to live with another king to expiate the crime. While there, the queen of the household fell in love with him. He refused her. She accused him falsely of having tried to attack her. The king, believing his wife, decided to have Bellerophon killed, but in a way that would not bring guilt onto himself. The king sent Bellerophon to a neighboring kingdom with a sealed letter. The letter instructed the receiving king to kill the bearer. Bellerophon did not know what was in the letter. The receiving king read it. He hesitated. He did not want to kill a guest in his hall. That was a great sin. So he, too, sent Bellerophon on an errand designed to kill him. He sent the young man to defeat the Chimera, a monstrous creature with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. It breathed fire. No one had ever defeated it. Bellerophon went to a wise prophet for advice. The prophet told him that he could not defeat the Chimera on foot. He needed a flying mount. There was only one such creature in the world, Pegasus, the winged horse, born from the blood of Medusa when Perseus had cut off her head years before. Pegasus lived wild on Mount Helicon. Bellerophon could not catch him. He prayed to Athena. The goddess came to him in a dream. She gave him a golden bridle. With this bridle, Pegasus could be tamed. Bellerophon went to Mount Helicon. He waited until Pegasus came to drink at a spring. He approached carefully. He slipped the bridle onto the horse. Pegasus was tame. Bellerophon mounted. He took to the air. He flew to the lair of the Chimera. He attacked it from above. The Chimera could breathe fire upward, but could not reach Bellerophon as he hovered just out of range. Bellerophon used a lead-tipped spear. He thrust it into the Chimera's mouth as it breathed fire. The lead melted in the fire and ran down the Chimera's throat. The monster died. Bellerophon returned in triumph. The king who had sent him to die was forced to honor him. Bellerophon married the king's daughter. He had children. He should have been a happy man for the rest of his life. But Bellerophon, having proved he could ride to the gods on his winged horse, became proud. He decided one day to fly Pegasus all the way to the top of Olympus to take a seat among the immortals. Zeus, watching this approach, was not amused. A mortal trying to enter the divine realm uninvited was an offense. Zeus sent a small gadfly. It landed on Pegasus and bit him. The horse reared. Bellerophon, who had grown careless, fell. He did not die from the fall. The gods would not be so kind. He was crippled. He landed on hard ground far from home. He could not stand. He could not walk well after. He spent the rest of his life as a beggar, wandering, unable to fly again. Pegasus continued on alone, eventually being received into the stables of Zeus, where he serves as a divine mount. Bellerophon died in obscurity. The Greeks remembered him as a warning. The man who flies high enough to defeat monsters can still be ruined by pride that makes him want to fly higher still. Sleep gently. The horse will carry you only as far as wisdom allows. The third is Atalanta and a race. Atalanta was the daughter of a king who had wanted a son. When she was born, her father abandoned her in the forest. She was raised by bears, then by hunters. She grew up to be the strongest, fastest, most skilled huntress in the world. She could outrun any man. She could shoot arrows better than any man. She joined the great hunt of the Caledonian boar, and she was the one who drew first blood. She was a celebrated hero. Her father eventually took her back. He wanted to marry her off to gain alliances. But Atalanta did not want to marry. She wanted to remain free. She made a deal with her father. She would marry any man who could defeat her in a foot race. But the price of losing was death. The man who challenged her and lost would be killed. Many men tried. Atalanta was so fast that none could keep up. She would catch them, slay them with her spear at the finish line, and continue her life unmarried. The pile of dead suitors grew. Then came a young man named Hippomenes. He had watched the races. He had fallen in love with Atalanta despite seeing the risk. He decided to enter. He did not, however, have a chance against her on foot alone. So he prayed to Aphrodite for help. The goddess gave him 3 golden apples. Beautiful, radiant, irresistible. She told him what to do. The race began. Atalanta sprinted ahead. She was faster than him by far. As she pulled away, Hippomenes threw the first golden apple. It rolled off the path into the grass. Atalanta, despite herself, slowed. The apple was so beautiful. She paused to pick it up. Then she ran on. Hippomenes pulled even then ahead. She caught him quickly. As she passed him, he threw the second apple off to the other side. Again she paused, picked it up, ran on. By the third apple, the finish line was close. Hippomenes was straining. Atalanta caught him just before the end. As she was about to overtake him, he threw the third apple. This time he threw it slightly behind her, so she would have to turn back briefly. She did. She picked up the apple. She turned. She ran. But Hippomenes had crossed the finish line. He had won. By marriage law, she was now his. Atalanta accepted it. Perhaps part of her had wanted to be caught. She married Hippomenes. They had a child. But the story takes a turn. Hippomenes, in his joy at winning, forgot to thank Aphrodite for the apples. The goddess, offended, decided to punish him. She caused him and Atalanta, one day, to make love in a temple sacred to another god. The other god was furious. He turned them both into lions. In Greek belief, lions could not mate with each other. They had to mate with leopards. So Atalanta and Hippomenes, transformed into lions, were forever separated. They could never be together again. They roamed as lions for the rest of their lives, eventually being yoked to the chariot of the goddess Cybele, where they pulled her chariot together but could never embrace. This is the story of Atalanta, the greatest huntress, the woman who tried to remain free, who was defeated finally not by skill, but by golden apples, by the small temptations that even the strongest will cannot fully resist. Sleep gently. The apples are everywhere. Sometimes we slow down for them. Sometimes the slowing is what gets us caught. Sometimes the catching is, in the end, what we wanted. 3 more stories. 18 in total now, if you count carefully. The Greeks had hundreds more. Each god had stories. Each hero, each mountain, each river, each season, each star in the sky was once a mortal who had been transformed. Each constellation was a myth carved in light against the night. But 18 is enough for one night. The mind can only hold so many stories. The dreams can only weave so many threads. There are 3 more stories, and then we will close. 3 stories that touch on the dark corners of mythology. 3 stories about what happens when humans cross certain lines that should not be crossed. The first is the story of Niobe. Niobe was the queen of Thebes. She was beautiful, wealthy, and proud. She had 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters. They were healthy and strong. She loved them fiercely. She had every reason in the world to be grateful and quiet. But Niobe was not quiet. She was proud. In Thebes, There was a yearly festival in honor of the goddess Leto, who was the mother of the twin gods Apollo and Artemis. Leto had only 2 children. Niobe, watching the women of Thebes bring offerings to Leto's temple, was struck by an idea. She had 14 children. Leto had only 2. Why should the people of Thebes worship Leto? She announced this thought publicly. She told the women they should worship her instead of Leto. She had more children. She was more deserving of honor. This was a deep insult. Mortals are not supposed to claim superiority over gods. It was not the kind of insult that could be ignored. Leto heard. She called her son and daughter. She told them what had been said. Apollo and Artemis, fierce in defense of their mother, set out to punish Niobe. They went to Thebes. They found Niobe's sons in the fields, hunting and exercising. Apollo took his bow. One by one, he shot all 7 sons. They died, each from a single arrow, perfectly aimed. Niobe heard the news. She wept. She mourned. She held the bodies of her 7 sons. But she still did not repent. She still had 7 daughters, she said. She still had more children than Leto. She would not bow down. Artemis then took her bow. She came to Niobe's house. One by one, she shot the 7 daughters. They died at their mother's feet, each from a single arrow. Niobe sat alone among the bodies of her 14 children. The pride had drained from her. The voice that had been so loud was now silent. She wept without stopping. She wept for so long that she could not stop. She wept for years in some versions of the story. The gods, in their final cruelty, transformed her into stone. She became a rock on a mountainside. But the rock, even as stone, continued to weep. Water seeps from it perpetually, even to this day, in a place called Mount Sipylus in Anatolia. The Greeks said the rock was Niobe, still mourning. The trickle of water from it was her unending grief. This is the story of Niobe. The Greeks told it to warn against pride, against comparing yourself to those who are greater than you, against speaking the words that, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. The cost of pride is always too high. It always comes back to take what we love. Sleep gently. Speak softly. The gods listen. The second is the story of Hermes, the clever god, the messenger, the trickster. Hermes was the son of Zeus and Maia. He was born in a cave on Mount Cyllene. On the very day he was born, he climbed out of his cradle and went exploring. He encountered a tortoise. He killed it. He used a shell and some strings of gut to make the first lyre. He sat down in the cave and taught himself to play. The lyre would later become his gift to his brother Apollo, who became the god of music. But before that, Hermes wandered out into the world. He came upon the cattle of Apollo, grazing in a field. Hermes was hungry. He decided to steal them. He drove the cattle backward. Their hooves left tracks pointing the wrong way. Anyone who came looking for the cattle would search in the direction the tracks pointed, not in the direction the cattle had actually gone. Hermes also tied bundles of branches to his own feet, leaving strange, unrecognizable footprints. The cattle wandered backward. The thief left no normal trail. He drove them to a hidden cave. He sacrificed 2 of them to the gods. He had the rest. He went home. He climbed back into his cradle. He pretended to be a normal newborn. The next day, Apollo discovered his cattle were missing. He followed the tracks. The tracks led the wrong way. He searched in confusion for days. Eventually, by divination, he traced the theft to Hermes, a newborn baby. Apollo went to the cave of Maia. Apollo confronted Hermes. The baby in the cradle denied everything. He could not have stolen cattle. He was a baby. He could not even walk. Apollo did not believe him. They took the case to Zeus. Zeus, watching this all, was amused. His newborn son had stolen the cattle of his older son, then denied it convincingly on his first day of life. This was a god worth knowing. Zeus ordered Hermes to return the cattle. Hermes did, but before giving them back, Hermes played a song on his new lyre. Apollo, who loved music more than anything, was enchanted. He offered to trade the cattle for the lyre. Hermes agreed. Apollo got the lyre. Hermes got the cattle. They became friends. Hermes was given a position in the divine court. He became the messenger of the gods. He guided souls to the underworld. He was the patron of travelers, merchants, and thieves. He carried his caduceus, a winged staff with two serpents twined around it, wherever he went. He wore winged sandals. He was the swiftest of the gods. He had many other adventures. He helped Perseus obtain the items he needed to defeat Medusa. He guided Odysseus on his journey home. He warned Odysseus about Circe's enchantment. He carried out missions for Zeus that no other god would carry out. He was clever, irreverent, charming, and a little dishonest. The Greeks loved him. They built temples for him at every crossroads. They made offerings to him before any journey. Hermes is, in his way, the patron of all of us who survive by our wits. He stole from his older brother on his first day of life and got away with it. He talked his way out of trouble. He played his music. He moved freely between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He was the negotiator between realms. When you're facing a problem you cannot solve by force, you are, in some small way, calling on Hermes. He is the god of finding the angle, the god of the unexpected solution, the god of the well-told story that gets you out of trouble. Sleep gently. There is always an angle. There is always a clever way through. The third is the story of the death of Heracles. We have heard, in an earlier chapter, of Heracles and his 12 labors. We have heard, briefly, of his death by a poisoned tunic given to him by his wife. But the story is darker and richer than that summary suggests. After the labors, Heracles continued his adventures. He fought wars. He sacked cities. He fathered children with many women. He was a force of nature. He eventually married a woman named Deianira, the daughter of a king. She loved him. He loved her. They had children. They tried to live a normal life, though Heracles was never quite normal. One day, Heracles and Deianira were traveling. They came to a wide river. The river was deep and fast. There was no bridge, but a centaur named Nessus offered to carry Deianira across on his back, while Heracles swam. Heracles thanked the centaur. He swam ahead. Deianira climbed onto Nessus's back. He carried her into the water. But Nessus had betrayed Heracles in some way before. Or simply Nessus was a creature of treachery. As they reached the far bank, Nessus tried to carry off Deianira. He raised her in his arms. He was prepared to gallop away. Heracles, on the far bank, saw what was happening. He drew his bow. He shot an arrow. The arrow struck Nessus in the chest. The centaur fell, mortally wounded. But before he died, Nessus had time for one more piece of cruelty. He had a plan. He told Deianira, with his last breath, that he was sorry for his attack. As an apology, he offered her his blood. He told her that if she ever feared that Heracles was being unfaithful, she could soak a tunic in this blood and give it to him. It would make him love her again, faithfully and forever. Deianira was naive. She did not realize the centaur was lying. She collected some of his blood in a small flask. She kept it as a charm. Years passed. Heracles, in his wanderings, had affairs. He brought captive women back. Deianira began to fear that he no longer loved her. The other women in the household were younger. Heracles was distant. She remembered Nessus's gift. She soaked a beautiful tunic in the centaur's blood. She sent it to Heracles. She told him it was a gift. Heracles put it on. Almost immediately, he began to feel pain. The tunic stuck to his skin. The blood, which was actually poisoned by the arrow that had killed Nessus, was burning him. He tried to tear the tunic off. The skin came with it. He screamed in agony. Narcissus' poison was the blood of the Hydra, the monster Heracles had killed years before. Heracles had dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood. The arrow that had killed Nessus had been one of those. The centaur's blood, mixed with the Hydra's, was the deadliest poison in the world. Even Heracles, mighty Heracles, could not survive it. He realized he was dying. He realized his wife had killed him. He did not blame her. He knew she had been tricked. He arranged his own death with dignity. He had a great pyre built on a mountaintop. He climbed onto it. He had a friend light it. He lay down on the burning logs. He met death with the calm of a man who had lived too long for his own happiness. But Heracles was in part divine. His immortal half could not die. As his mortal flesh burned, his immortal spirit rose into the air. He was taken up to Olympus. He was made a god. He was given Hebe, the goddess of youth, as his wife. He took his place among the immortals. Diana, when she learned what she had done, killed herself in grief. She had not meant to murder her husband. She had been deceived by Nessus' last cruelty. The story of Heracles ends then in two places: on the burning pyre, where his mortal body died, and on Olympus, where his immortal self lived on. The Greeks saw this as the deepest truth about heroes. Their mortal lives end in suffering. Their immortal names live on, untouched by the suffering free. This is what the Greeks believed about glory. It does not save you from the suffering, but it survives the suffering. The names of the great heroes, 3,000 years later, are still spoken. The bodies are dust. The names remain. Sleep gently. The body is mortal. What you do with it, the things you make, the people you help, the children you teach, may yet outlive you in some form for a very long time. These are the additional stories. 18 myths now, taken together. We could go further. The Greeks had 1,000. We have stopped at 18. The dreams can only weave so many threads. One last story, perhaps the most famous tragedy of all the Greek myths. The story of Oedipus. Before Oedipus was born, his father Laius, the king of Thebes, was warned by an oracle. The oracle told Laius that if he ever had a son, that son would grow up to kill him. When Laius's wife Jocasta gave birth to a boy, Laius could not bear to kill the child outright, but he could not let him live either. So he pierced the baby's ankles with iron pins. He gave the child to a shepherd. He ordered the shepherd to take the baby into the mountains and leave him there to die of exposure. The shepherd took the baby. He went into the mountains. He looked at the baby's face. He could not do it. He could not leave a newborn to die. So instead, the shepherd gave the baby to another shepherd, one from a distant kingdom, Corinth. That shepherd took the baby home with him. He gave the baby to the king of Corinth, who had no son. The king and his wife adopted the boy. They named him Oedipus, which means swollen foot, because his ankles had healed but had been damaged. Oedipus grew up in Corinth, believing the king and queen there were his real parents. He was a strong, intelligent young man. He should have lived a happy life. But one day, at a feast, a drunken man told Oedipus that he was adopted, that the king and queen of Corinth were not his real parents. Oedipus was disturbed. He asked his parents. They denied it. They reassured him, but the doubt would not leave him. He decided to consult an oracle. He went to the oracle at Delphi. The oracle gave him a terrible prophecy. The oracle said that Oedipus was fated to kill his father and marry his mother. Oedipus was horrified. He determined never to return to Corinth. If he could not be near the king and queen, whom he still believed were his parents, he could not fulfill the prophecy. He set out to wander the world. He traveled for many days. At a narrow place where 3 roads met, he encountered an older man in a chariot, accompanied by a small group of attendants. The chariot was blocking the narrow road. The older man and his attendants shouted at Oedipus to step aside. Oedipus, proud, refused. There was an argument. The argument became a fight. Oedipus, in the brief violence, killed the older man and most of his attendants. One attendant escaped. Oedipus continued on his way. He did not know who he had killed. He arrived at Thebes. He found the city under a curse. A monster called the Sphinx was sitting at the gates, asking every traveler a riddle. Those who could not answer were eaten. No one had ever solved the riddle. The Sphinx asked Oedipus, "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening?" Oedipus thought. He answered, "Man. As a baby, he crawls on 4. As an adult, he walks on 2. In old age, he leans on a cane, walking on 3. The Sphinx, defeated, threw herself off a cliff and died. Thebes was saved. The grateful people of Thebes proclaimed Oedipus their king. Their previous king, Laius, his father, had recently been killed by bandits on the road. His widow, Jocasta, was beautiful and lonely. As part of his ascendancy, Oedipus married her. Years passed. They had 4 children together. Oedipus was a good king. He ruled wisely. He was loved. But then a plague came to Thebes. Crops failed. Cattle died. Babies were born sick or stillborn. The city was suffering. Oedipus, as a good king, set out to find the cause and end it. He sent his brother-in-law Creon to consult the oracle at Delphi. The oracle returned with an answer. The plague was caused by an unsolved murder. The murderer of Laius, the previous king, was still in the city, unpunished. Until justice was served on this murderer, the plague would not lift. Oedipus swore he would find the killer. He launched an investigation. He summoned the prophet Tiresias, a blind old man who saw with his mind. Tiresias did not want to answer, but Oedipus pressed him. Tiresias finally said, in great sorrow, that the killer was Oedipus himself. Oedipus refused to believe it. He accused Tiresias of lying. He accused his brother-in-law Creon of plotting against him. He raged, but the pieces began to fall into place. He talked to the shepherd who had escaped a fight on the road. He talked to the shepherd who had been told to leave the baby Oedipus in the mountains. He talked to people who had known Laius and Jocasta in their younger years. The truth emerged in stages. Slowly, each new fact a fresh wound. The man he had killed on the road, years ago, the older man in the chariot, had been Laius, the previous king of Thebes. His father, the woman he had married, Jocasta, was his mother. The 4 children he had with her, they were his children and his half-siblings. Oedipus had fulfilled the prophecy without knowing it. The very actions he had taken to escape the prophecy, fleeing Corinth, refusing to return, had led him directly into fulfilling it. When Jocasta understood, she hanged herself. Oedipus found her body. He took the gold pins from her clothing. He drove them into his own eyes. He blinded himself. He gave the throne to Creon. He left Thebes. He wandered the world, blind and aged, accompanied by his daughter Antigone. He lived for many years in exile. He had time, in his blindness, to reflect on everything. Eventually he died in a sacred grove near Athens. The gods, in some versions, granted him peace at the end. He was taken into the earth. The place became sacred. This is the story of Oedipus. The Greeks told it as the deepest tragedy of all. It is not a story about evil. Oedipus did not want to kill his father or marry his mother. He spent his life trying to prevent both. The tragedy is that his attempts to prevent the prophecy were themselves the way the prophecy came true. The Greeks saw this as a story about fate, about the limits of human will, about how, even when we try our best to do the right thing, we sometimes do the worst thing without knowing. But the story is also about responsibility. Oedipus, when he discovered what he had done, did not deny it. He did not run from it. He took the punishment on himself, terrible as it was. He blinded himself. He went into exile. He carried the weight of his actions, even though the actions had been beyond his knowledge. There's a kind of integrity in this, the hardest integrity, the integrity that says, even if I did not know, even if I was deceived, I still hold myself accountable. I still pay the price. This is perhaps the deepest truth of the Greek tragedies. They do not let their heroes off the hook, even when the gods are responsible, even when fate is responsible. The hero, in the end, takes the weight. Sleep gently. The roads we choose to avoid sometimes turn out to be the very roads we are walking. The best we can do is to face what we find at the end, to take responsibility for what we have done, to carry the weight without denying it. This was the last story for tonight. 19 myths in total. The Greeks had 1,000 more. They have told stories for 3,000 years. They will tell stories for as long as humans care about stories. We have stopped here at 19. Before sleep takes you fully, let me sit with you in a different way. Not with another story, with a few quiet reflections on what all these stories have been and what they continue to be. The Greek myths were created over a very long time. They did not appear at once. They evolved across centuries. The earliest versions, from the time before writing, were sung by traveling poets. The poets adapted the stories to their audiences. Different villages had different versions. The names of the heroes shifted. The endings sometimes changed. By the time Homer wrote down the Iliad and the Odyssey, around 2,800 years ago, the myths had already been told for many centuries. Homer did not invent these stories. He inherited them. He shaped them. He polished them. But the bones were already there. The Greeks who heard these stories in their own time did not always believe them literally. Many of them did. Many of them did not. The myths were not, for them, a fixed religion in the way that some later religions would become. They were a way of thinking about the human condition. They were poetry. They were drama. They were psychology before psychology had a name. The Greek philosophers, in time, would push back against the myths. Plato, in the Republic, criticized Homer for showing the gods behaving badly. Plato wanted gods who were perfect, morally and otherwise. The myths showed gods who were petty, jealous, lustful, and cruel. Plato thought these were poor models for young people to learn from. But Plato lost the argument with history. The myths survived. They survived because they were true to something. They were not literally true. They were true to the way humans actually behave. The gods, in Greek mythology, were really projections of human nature, written large. The pettiness, the jealousy, the lust, the cruelty, these were not failures of the myths. They were the point of the myths. The Greeks were saying, look, this is what we are. We are like the gods. We are messy and ambitious and afraid and sometimes wonderful. This is why the myths still speak to us. 3,000 years later, our gods have changed. Our religions have changed. Our political systems and our technology and our daily lives are unrecognizable from theirs. But the patterns the myths describe, the patterns of human emotion, of human relationship, of human striving, those have not changed. You still know what it is to be Pandora. To open the box you should not have opened. You still know what it is to be Icarus, to fly closer to the sun than you should. You still know what it is to be Orpheus, to turn around at the worst possible moment. You still know what it is to be Odysseus, to want, more than anything, to come home. You also know what it is to be Niobe, to say the words that cannot be taken back. You know what it is to be Oedipus, to do the worst thing without knowing. You know what it is to be Heracles, to carry a strength that is also a burden. The myths are a mirror, not of who you are exactly, but of patterns you contain. patterns the Greeks recognized in themselves 3,000 years ago and that we still recognize in ourselves today. This is the gift the Greeks left us. Not just the buildings, not just the philosophy, the stories, the patterns of being human, given names and faces and consequences so that we can see them in others before we have to suffer them ourselves. When you encounter a Narcissus in your life, someone who can only see their own reflection, you have a name for what is happening. When you watch someone refuse to listen to a warning and reach for what they have been told not to reach for, you have a name for it. When you sense in yourself the urge to compare your blessings to someone else's and to claim superiority, the name of Niobe quietly surfaces. The names help. The patterns help. Knowing that this has happened before, that others have suffered the same way, helps. We are not the first humans to face what we are facing. We are part of a long line. When you wake tomorrow, the stories will not be remembered in their details. Most of what you have heard tonight will dissolve back into the general background of your mind. But fragments will remain. A flash of an image, a name half recalled, a vague awareness that you have heard this somewhere before when something familiar happens to you. This is enough. The Greeks did not write down their myths to test their listeners. They wrote them to comfort them, to say, "You're not alone. Others have walked this road. Others have made these mistakes. Others have suffered and survived and sometimes triumphed." The patterns you find in your own life are old. Be kind to yourself tonight. Whatever is on your mind, whatever weighs on you, whatever you have done or failed to do, others have done it before. Others have failed before. Others have suffered and lived and gone on. The myths assure us, across the centuries, that the human story is bigger than any one of us. That what we are going through, however it feels, has been felt before. Sleep gently, then. The stories are with you. The patterns are with you. The long line of humans who have lived through every possible version of joy and sorrow stands behind you, witnessing. You are part of it. 2 final stories. After these, we will be done. The first is the story of Perseus and Thisbe. In ancient Babylon, though the Greeks adopted the story and made it their own, there lived 2 young people. Perseus was a young man. Thisbe was a young woman. They lived in adjoining houses, separated only by a shared wall. They were beautiful, both of them. They had grown up together. They had played together as children. As they grew older, they fell in love. But their fathers hated each other. The reason was lost to history. Whatever the cause, the 2 families forbade Perseus and Thisbe from seeing each other. They could not meet. They could not speak. They were not even supposed to look at each other. The lovers, however, found a way. The wall between their houses had a small crack, a flaw in the stone. They discovered it. They could pass their voices through it. They could put their lips to it and almost feel each other's breath. For many nights, they met at the crack. They whispered to each other. They confessed their love. They made plans. They wept that the wall would not crumble for them. They pressed their hands to the stone, longing to touch. Eventually, they decided they could not bear it any longer. They would run away together. They arranged to meet the next night outside the city walls, beneath a mulberry tree by an old tomb. They would leave Babylon. They would build a life together somewhere their families could not reach them. The next night, Thisbe slipped out of her father's house. She made her way through the dark streets. She came to the gates of the city. She passed through them. She found the mulberry tree. She was the first to arrive. But as she waited, a lioness came down from the hills to drink at the spring nearby. The lioness's mouth was bloody from a recent kill. Thisbe, seeing the great beast, ran. She hid in a small cave nearby. In her flight, she dropped her veil. The lioness, finishing her drink, came upon the veil. She sniffed it. She tossed it in her bloody jaws. She tore it. Then, satisfied, she wandered back into the hills. A short time later, Pyramus arrived. He was late. He had been delayed by something. He came to the mulberry tree. He saw the torn, bloody veil on the ground. He saw the tracks of the lioness. He drew the wrong conclusion. He believed that Thisbe had come, been killed by the lioness, and dragged away. He believed she was dead. He believed it was his fault. If he had been on time, he could have saved her. Pyramus could not bear the thought. He drew his sword. He pressed it against his own chest. He fell forward onto it. His blood sprayed onto the white berries of the mulberry tree, staining them red. He died beneath the tree. A few minutes later, Thisbe emerged from her hiding place. The lioness was gone. The danger had passed. She came back to the tree to wait for her love. She found him, bleeding, dying. She rushed to him. She lifted his head. She tried to revive him. He could not be saved. She understood in that moment what had happened. She had survived. He had not. The fates had played a small and cruel trick. She kissed him. She picked up his sword. She turned its point toward herself. She fell on it, just as he had beside him. They were found together the next morning. The two families, finally united by grief, buried them in a single tomb. The mulberry tree above their grave bore dark red berries from that day forward. The white mulberries became blood red in mourning for the lovers. This story would be retold many times across the centuries. Shakespeare borrowed it for the comic play within a play in A Midsummer Night's Dream. He also borrowed its essence for Romeo and Juliet, two young lovers kept apart by their families, dying together because of a small misunderstanding at the worst possible moment. The Greeks told it as a story about love and bad luck, about how the smallest accident, a dropped veil, a delayed lover, can destroy the greatest happiness, about how passion, when it is great enough, would rather die than live without its object. Sleep gently. The small misunderstandings of life sometimes cost us things we did not need to lose. Where we can, slow down. Where we can, check before we conclude. The veil on the ground may not mean what we think it means. The second is the story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was the king of Corinth. He was clever, too clever, perhaps. He outwitted everyone, friends, enemies, even gods. He cheated, he lied, he plotted. He killed travelers who entered his city for sport and profit. He was deeply, comprehensively wicked. When his time came to die, Sisyphus tricked death himself. Hades sent Thanatos to fetch him. Sisyphus, with sweet words and an offer to learn how the chains worked, persuaded Thanatos to demonstrate the chains by putting them on himself. Then Sisyphus locked Thanatos in his own chains. While death was imprisoned, no one in the world could die. The cosmic order was thrown into chaos. People who should have died from accidents and old age and disease simply continued living, sometimes in agony, unable to escape into death. Eventually, the gods discovered what had happened. They freed Thanatos. They came for Sisyphus. But Sisyphus had one more trick. Before going down to the underworld, he instructed his wife to perform no funeral rites for him. She was to leave his body unburied. She was to make no offerings to the gods of the dead. When Sisyphus arrived in the underworld, he complained to Persephone. He told her his wife was being disrespectful. He had been given no proper burial. He begged her to let him return briefly, just long enough to scold his wife and arrange for proper rites. Then he would come back willingly. Persephone, moved, let him go. Sisyphus naturally did not come back. He returned to Corinth. He continued his life of trickery and pleasure. The gods had to send Hermes himself to drag him, by force, back to the underworld. By the time Sisyphus arrived in the underworld a second time, the gods had had enough. They decided on a punishment specifically tailored to him. The cleverest man who had ever lived would be given the dumbest task in the world. There was a boulder, very large, very heavy. There was a hill. very steep. Sisyphus's task was to roll the boulder up the hill. When he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down. He would have to walk back down, follow the boulder, find it at the bottom, and start pushing it back up again. For all eternity. Sisyphus would never finish. He would never rest. The boulder would always slip back at the last moment. He would always have to start again. The Greeks told this story as the supreme illustration of the absurd. A great cleverness ending in the dumbest possible task. A great king reduced to a laborer with no future. But the French philosopher Albert Camus, in the 20th century, found something else in the story. Camus said that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, because Sisyphus has accepted his task. He has stopped fighting it. The pushing of the boulder is, in the end, simply what he does. The walking back down is what he does. The starting over is what he does. There's a rhythm in it. There is even, perhaps, a small dignity. The same is true, Camus said, of human life. Our daily routines often seem like Sisyphean labor. We do the same things. We struggle up the same hills. The boulders we push roll back down. We start again. Most of our days will be forgotten. But the work is the work. The walking is the walking. There is the sky above. There is the weight of the stone. There is perhaps even meaning in continuing. Not because the meaning is given to us, but because we make it ourselves by continuing. Sisyphus, watching the boulder roll back to the bottom of his hill, takes a moment to look around, to see the sky, to breathe, to accept that this is his life. And then he walks back down to begin again. We might call this acceptance. We might call this defeat. We might call this dignity. It depends, perhaps, on the day. Sleep gently. Whatever you have to do tomorrow, you will do it. The boulder will be there. The hill will be there. You will be there. The walking back down is also part of the day. The starting again is also part of the day. 2 final stories. We have heard 21 in total now. The Greeks had 1,000 more, but 21 is enough. The dreams can only weave so many threads. The mind can only hold so many names. One last story, then we will truly stop. It is the story of Antigone, the daughter of Oedipus, the young woman who chose obedience to the gods over obedience to the king. After Oedipus had blinded himself and left Thebes in exile, his throne went to his 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices. The brothers agreed to share the throne, ruling in alternate years. Eteocles took the first year. When his year ended, he refused to step down. Polynices, banished, raised an army from foreign cities. He attacked his brother's city. The 2 brothers fought in single combat outside the walls of Thebes. They killed each other. Both died on the battlefield. The army of Polynices retreated. The king of Thebes was now Creon, brother of Jocasta, uncle of the dead brothers. Creon made a decree. Eteocles, the defender of the city, would be buried with full honors. Polynices, the attacker, would be left unburied on the battlefield. His body would be eaten by dogs and vultures. To bury him was forbidden on pain of death. For ancient Greeks, this was a profound cruelty. The dead had to be buried. The soul of an unburied corpse could not enter the underworld. The dead person would wander the borderlands forever, never resting. Antigone, sister of the dead brothers, would not allow this. She loved both her brothers. She believed that the laws of the gods were higher than the laws of any king. The dead must be buried. She would do it. She went in secret to the battlefield. She covered her brother's body with earth, performed the brief rites that the gods required. It was not a full burial, but it was enough to satisfy the requirement. Polynices' soul could now pass into the underworld. She was caught. The guards brought her to Creon. He demanded to know why she had defied his decree. Antigone answered with calm and clarity. She said that the laws of the gods were eternal. They had been written before any human king had been born, they would still exist long after Creon was forgotten. She had chosen to obey the older, deeper law. Creon was outraged. He sentenced her to death, not a public execution that would create a martyr. Instead, she would be sealed alive in a tomb cut into a rock. She would be given enough food for a few days. She would die there, slowly, in darkness. His son, Haman, was engaged to Antigone. He pleaded with his father. He told Creon that the city was sympathetic to Antigone, that the gods would punish a king who let her die, that his own son would not be able to live without her. Creon would not listen. He told Haman to forget Antigone and find another bride. The prophet Tiresias came to Creon, the same blind prophet who had warned Oedipus. He told Creon that the gods were angry, that the unburied body of Polynices was polluting the city, that Creon's decision was wrong, that suffering would come to his house unless he changed course. Creon argued with Tiresias at first. Then, slowly he relented. He gave the order. Polynices would be buried. Antigone would be freed. But it was too late. The men sent to bury Polynices completed their task. The men sent to free Antigone arrived at her tomb. They opened it. They found her hanging inside. She had not waited to be rescued. She had used her own scarf to end her life rather than die slowly in the darkness. Haman, who had followed the men, saw what had happened. He drew his sword. He tried to attack his father. Creon dodged. Haman, in his rage and grief, turned the sword on himself. He died beside Antigone. When Creon's wife Eurydice heard that her son was dead, she too killed herself. Creon was left alive, alone in his great hall, surrounded by the corpses of his family. His decree had cost him everything. He had chosen pride over wisdom. He had refused to bend until it was too late. The play of Antigone, written by Sophocles, ends with Creon broken on the steps of his own palace. The chorus delivers a final line that has echoed through every century since. They say that wisdom is the highest happiness, and that pride brings down great houses, and that the gods do not forgive those who refuse to learn. This is the story of Antigone. The Greeks told it as a story about the conflict between two kinds of law, the law of kings and cities, and the older law of the gods, of family, of human decency. When these laws conflict, the Greeks said, is the older law that wins. Always. Eventually. The kings who think they can override the deeper law always discover, in the end, that they were wrong. The cost is paid in the lives of those they loved. Antigone has been performed on stages all over the world for 2,500 years. She has been claimed as a heroine by revolutionaries, by religious dissenters, by every movement that has stood up to unjust authority. She is one of the great moral figures in Western literature. A young woman, with a scarf, choosing to bury her brother, choosing what was right over what was permitted, dying for it. Sleep gently. The deeper laws are still there. They're still being broken. They're still, eventually, restoring themselves. Sometimes through people like Antigone. Sometimes through time alone. But always, eventually. 22 stories now. We will go no further. The Greeks had hundreds more. We have done enough for one night. And before we close, one more very short story. The Caledonian Boar Hunt. In the kingdom of Caledon, King Ineus had forgotten to make an offering to the goddess Artemis at harvest time. Artemis was offended. She sent a monstrous boar to ravage the kingdom. The boar destroyed crops. It killed shepherds. It tore through villages. It cannot be killed by ordinary hunters. Ineus called for help. He invited the greatest hunters of Greece to come and hunt the boar. The hunters who came included Meleager, the king's own son, Theseus, the slayer of the Minotaur, Castor and Pollux, the twin brothers, and Atalanta, the famous huntress we have heard of before. Some of the men did not want a woman in the hunt. They protested, but Meleager insisted. He had fallen in love with Atalanta the moment he saw her. She would hunt with them. The hunt was difficult. The boar was strong and clever. It killed several of the hunters before the chase could even begin properly. Bodies were torn. Friends fell. The chase took days. Atalanta drew first blood. She shot the boar with an arrow. The wound was not fatal, but it slowed the beast. The men pressed in. Meleager drove his spear through the boar's heart. The boar was dead. The kingdom was saved. Meleager, in his love for Atalanta, awarded her the hide of the boar as the prize. She had drawn first blood. The honor was hers. But Meleager's uncles, the brothers of his mother, objected. They said no woman should receive such an honor. They tried to take the hide back from Atalanta. Meleager, in his rage, killed them both. When Meleager's mother learned that her son had killed her brothers, she was destroyed. She had a magical brand of wood, given to her at Meleager's birth, that was bound to his life. If the brand burned away, he would die. She had kept it safe all his life. Now, in her grief and her conflicted loyalties, she threw the brand into the fire. Meleager, far away, suddenly cried out in pain. He fell. As the brand burned, he died. His mother, when she realized what she had done, killed herself. The Caledonian royal family was destroyed by the chain reaction of pride, love, and ancient curses. Atalanta, holding the hide of the boar, watched it all unfold. She left Caledon. She returned to her own land, mourning the hunter who had loved her. This is the story of the Caledonian boar hunt. The Greeks told it as a story about the costs of glory. The hunters who killed the boar saved the kingdom, but they paid prices that nobody could have foreseen. The boar's death cascaded into the deaths of many of those who had hunted it. The act of victory was not, in the end, fully separable from defeat. Sleep gently. The hunts we go on have prices that we cannot see until later. The hide we win is sometimes the thing that cost us the most. Truly, this was the last story. The mind is full now. 23 myths. We have walked through Pandora's first opening, Prometheus's burning gift, Persephone's underworld, Icarus's falling, Orpheus's unfinished journey, Theseus's labyrinth, Perseus's mirror, Heracles' labors, the Trojan walls falling, Odysseus's long return, Midas's gold, Narcissus's pool, Jason's fleece, Phaeton's chariot, Psyche's lamp, Apollo's laurel, Bellerophon's pride, Atlanta's apples, Niobe's stone, Hermes' cleverness, Heracles' pyre, Oedipus's roads, Pyramus and Thisbe's mulberry, Sisyphus's boulder, Antigone's rocky tomb, and the boar of Caledon. You will not remember them all. That is fine. Some will surface tomorrow when you see something that reminds you. Some will surface in years to come. Some will never surface at all. That is also fine. The stories have done their work simply by being heard. Even half asleep, even with the mind drifting, the patterns have found their place in your unconscious. They will rest there. They will be available in some quiet form when you need them. The Greeks would have appreciated that you listened. They would have welcomed you as a fellow human, part of the long chain of listeners who have heard these stories from the time of Homer until now. Sleep deeply, then. The world is still here. The myths are still here. They're not going anywhere. Rest now with what you have. And whatever comes tomorrow, the patterns of the human heart, as the Greeks named them so long ago, will be with you. To recognize, to resist where you can, to accept where you must. Good night, or good morning, or good afternoon, whatever it is for you in your part of the world. Sleep well. We have walked together through 10 of the great stories of Greek mythology. Pandora and the Perseus, Prometheus and the theft of fire, Persephone and the cycle of seasons, Icarus and the cost of pride, Orpheus, who went to the underworld for love and could not trust the silence. Theseus and the Minotaur, Perseus and Medusa, Heracles and his 12 labors, the Trojan War, the long journey home of Odysseus. These stories were told for 3,000 years before the time of the Greeks who wrote them down. They were told for 2,000 years after. They continue to be told tonight. They will be told for as long as humans tell each other stories about who we are. The Greeks believed that the myths held wisdom that could not be put into argument or proof. They could only be told. Each listener would take from them what they needed. Tonight, perhaps, you needed to fall asleep. The stories have done their work. They have filled your mind with images of distant gods and impossible monsters and brave humans. Your dreams will be richer for it. The hours will pass more gently. Or perhaps you needed to learn. Perhaps you have heard names tonight you had only seen before in passing. Perhaps the patterns of these stories, pride and punishment, love and loss, the long journey home, have rung against your own life in ways you did not expect. Perhaps you will think about them again tomorrow in a quiet moment. Either is enough. The myths do their work in different ways. There is no single right way to receive them. The Greeks have a word for the kind of stillness you feel at the end of a long story well told. It is hesychia, stillness, quiet, the state of the soul when the tale has been heard and the listener has returned to their own life. May you find hesychia tonight. May the stories sit gently in you. May they not be a weight, but a quiet companion. Sleep well, or, if you're not sleeping, walk gently into your day. The myths are not just for the night. They walk with us into our mornings. They sit beside us in our work. They listen with us in our conversations. They are part of how we make sense of our lives. You hold a piece of 3,000 years of human storytelling in you now. Most of the people who told these stories are forgotten. Their voices have been silent for a very long time. But the stories themselves remain. They have outlived empires. They have outlived languages. They will probably outlive us in some form for as long as humans listen to stories at all. That is a small but real consolation. Whatever we suffer, whatever joy we have, whatever we love or fear, others have suffered, rejoiced, loved, feared before us. Often the same things. Often in patterns recognizable across millennia. We are part of a story that has been being told for a very long time. Tonight, you have heard a chapter of it. Sleep gently. Good night. Good morning. Good afternoon. You are now equipped just a little better with the stories of human imagination than you were 3 hours ago. That is enough.